Rather than going through my tissue-thin awards charade this year, I thought I'd just cut to the chase and give my top 5 and my bottom 5 of 2010, almost like a real critic. You'll know when I switch from one to the other, because during the top 5 I'll speak with breathless enthusiasm like I've cornered you at the buffet table at the most excruciating party of your life, and then when I'm doing my bottom 5, my voice will drop in pitch and become filled with disgust like my sandwich just farted in my mouth. BioShock 2. It had one gunshot wound to the kneecap even before it left the gate, being a hasty sequel to a game that had no opening nor need for a sequel, and proceeded only to stumble through incomprehensibility, with its only bright moments being its occasional resemblance to its infinitely better predecessor. At least it didn't have the pipe dream minigame, but that's like saying at least my horse costs less to feed now that it's dead. Red Dead Redemption. Rockstar's Old West Odyssey might have suffered a little from a bit of kitchen sink approach to gameplay, a kitchen sink full of brown washing up, but overall was like throwing yourself onto a mattress made of soft meringue, unstructured but oddly satisfying, and now you can play it with zombies in, which still baffles me. Do you get a tax break if you make a zombie game or something? There were only 2 games this year that I wanted to keep playing after I'd reviewed them. Dead Rising 2 was one, and the other, stalling tactic, was Just Cause 2. But to the yin must come the yang, to the cream must come the cheese, to the giddy high of new love must come irritable bowel syndrome, a game that killed its franchise so thoroughly that the only acceptable sequel would be a box containing nothing but an apology letter and some chocolates. I refer, of course, to Halo Reach. Burned you going for a second there, didn't I? Actually, it's Fable 3. Burned again. Kane and Lynch 2 Dog Days. Step onto your first place podium, then put a rope around your neck so we can kick it away. But the release of the Cataclysm expansion seems like an obvious time for a retrospective, in that I firmly believe it is the reason absolutely fuck all else came out in December. Actually, that's not true. There was Tron Evolution and Mario All-Stars. Oh well, do they know it's Christmas time? Over the Christmas period, I decided to use my annual small injection of free time to level a character as far as I could, and you little motherfuckers better appreciate this, because hanging yourself on Christmas Day is slightly less depressing than spending it playing World of Warcraft. My original intention was to use the time to get up to level 85 and see all the areas, and maybe for an encore I could eat an entire mahogany dining table. I may have given some subtle hints in the past that I've played WoW before, subtle hints such as an entire fucking book, published by Dark Horse, available on Amazon. Buy now, beat the rush. The fact that Fable has a large following is like the existence of the appendix of the biological compulsion to have 18 kids that's exclusive to rednecks. It's one of the little things about humanity I find completely incomprehensible. It flummoxes me how Peter Molyneux persistently thinks anyone could seriously value one random NPC over the others, when the extent of all their personalities is going boo when you overcharge at the shops you own, or yay because you danced around whistling like a retard. Actually, they've grown in sophistication somewhat, in that now individuals would only become your friend if you go on a little fetch quest for them, because I remember thinking in Fable 2 what this relationship bullshit really needs is even less motivation to do it. But then, something weird happens. I thought the game would end when the evil king was overthrown, but when the revolution batters down his door, he basically says, fine, you be king then. Oh, and by the way, an evil black primordial slime is going to come and slaughter us all 1 year from now. Toodly-oo. Ooh, thought I. An unexpected twist? An actual moral dilemma? Gold star, Peter. But no, the moral dilemma thing falls down because your decisions are still referred to as good and evil, even though the evil option is so everyone can still be alive next Christmas. And what really gets to me is that your character never explains their decisions. Horrors from beyond the veil of time and space are coming to eat us, so shut up seems like a pretty good draw card for a leader to have. At one point you can either drain a lake to mine the valuable resources within and pay for everyone to not die, that's the evil option, or you can leave it because it looks pretty. Lady, unless the natural beauty is outstanding enough to flummox dimensional shamblers, we're going with the option where we don't get worn as hats by cosmic monstrosities. So here was my cunning plan. After busking until my loot strings had severed all my fingers, I bought the most expensive properties and jacked up all the rent. The time leading to the deadline only passes in between story missions, and rented property exists in an alternate space-time continuum that pays out every 5 minutes of real time. So prior to doing the final story mission, I would simply leave the game on overnight with the TV off, lest anyone call me eco-unfriendly, then donate the subsequent mountain of gold to pay for all my nice benevolent decisions. Tee-hee, leadership's easier than I thought. This is what I would have done if the story hadn't suddenly and unexpectedly jumped forward 150 days and gone straight to the final battle. What? My non-American viewers, who understand that the world does not consist only of a single nation sailing across an infinite sea of Mexican migrant workers, will no doubt have heard that the water around Brisbane got sick of waiting for people to come hit the beach and decided to bring the party to us. First thought, oh cock, all the nearest game retailers are in the CBD because some retarded pile of cartilage on the town planning department thought it would be a great idea to put 30 EB Games shops within the same 10 square yards. Second thought, oh balls, with humanitarian aid selfishly obstructing the delivery services, I won't be seeing any of my imports anytime soon either. Third thought, oh goody, that means I can can go back inside and keep playing Minecraft. So with Fisher-Price Shoggoth scratching at my walls, I decided the sensible level-headed thing to do would be to tunnel down into the centre of the earth. Perhaps there, thought I would find the point to all this. Well, after wearing out more pics than Jimi Hendrix on a caffeine drip, I found a fair amount of iron, enough coal to black up the entire Ku Klux Klan, and 3 lava flows, every single one of which I fell into and lost all my items. Christ, this is like Zelda meets There Will Be Blood. Part of the appeal of building is the effort required to gather materials. That 80-foot golden cock and balls wouldn't be so satisfyingly turgid if it weren't for the entire continent you had to turn upside down to find all the ore. What's this? Some actual game releases in 2011? Fucking finally! Well, a release anyway, a 2D platformer on the Wii. Jeez, don't all crowd in at once, guys. I know we're a bit out of the way, but we are the world's biggest island nation. It's not like we're hard to spot on a map. I had to import it from the UK and it showed up all smelling of chip fat and xenophobia. Not that I'm bitter or anything, but when the nuclear holocaust brings down Western civilization and Australia survives by virtue of being largely self-sufficient and in a position of little strategic value, I am so not sending you any of my meat pie floater. With the main character being literally a shadow, the other obvious comparison for me is Limbo, but while Limbo was a harrowing walk through a dark forest hand in hand with an unpleasant smelling man breathing loudly through his nose, Shadow's Whatever is more like a walk down a very long corridor hand in hand with a very boring man who occasionally stops to spit in your face. Hey, our shadows look like Duplo recreations of swarms of bees. Oh, so they do. I know, let's put a semi-transparent cloud image over the whole screen for the entirety of gameplay. But won't that also look like arse? Yes, but criticism is easier to deal with if it's thinly spread. 3 years after the events of Dead Space 1, Ian M. Vonnegut has taken the standard route of horror story survivor aftermaths and wound up in the loony bin, still haunted by visions of that one lady he couldn't save, rather than the several hundred people whose corpses he desecrated, the selfish twat. In my review of Dead Space 1, I mocked it for trying to tug my flinty heartstrings by inflicting personal tragedy upon a character with no voice, no personality, and a bucket on their head, which was like trying to make us feel sorry for a floor lamp because someone knocked it over. Now, if I were a paranoid man, which I'm not, whatever people have been saying about me, I'd say Dead Space has started deliberately trying to provoke me. The very first thing that happens in Dead Space 2 is a bloke turning into a necromorph, fully illuminated and literally 6 inches away from your face. Then it grabs you by the lapels and screams at you while his eyes pop out. This is the horror equivalent of a small child banging its head on a wall so you pay it attention. Hey, look at me, are you scared yet? What if all the skin rolled off my face? Are you scared now? Ah, doing this really hurts actually. Ah, I currently represent threat in an extremely unspecific way. Ah. It's one of those great personality gauging questions, isn't it? Do you prefer tits or bums? Sorry, do you prefer Marvel or DC? Or alternatively, do you prefer Marvel or DC or neither because you're not fucking 14? But I'm not into ongoing comics because to my mind a good story is like a good bowel movement. It's only really satisfying once it's ended. Because if you just keep going, then eventually your body runs out of shit and moves on to pushing all your internal organs out your sphincter until only a foul-smelling shell remains. Anyone who wants to get in on your incredibly long poo gets turned off because they need to have gone through all the poo up to that point to have the necessary context, and this is where the analogy is breaking down somewhat. Some people say they have difficulty telling whether I recommend a game or not. I know, what morons. So in the name of keeping things nice and clear for you touchy sods, let me be as unambiguous as possible in this critique. Mine, Jack, is fucking bad. Don't play it. The main character's hair looks like someone glued a 3D magic eye picture to the back of his head, and the aforesaid lady character I estimate to be around 65 years old. The environments are grey, linear, loveless combat arenas furnished only by chest-high walls like soul-crushing cubicle farms for administrative midgets, and even for video games the voice acting is appalling, which is like being the ugliest bloke at the Andrew Lloyd Webber lookalike contest. When characters converse, I'm all but certain that the actors recorded their lines in different rooms, probably different days, and perhaps on different planes of existence. I'll admit I was first attracted to Two Worlds 2 by the title, a title with a rather severe case of we were not expecting to get sequels out of this, so we put a 2 on the title, and now we have to put another 2 on the end and it sounds really weird syndrome, which someone really needs to come up with a shorter name for. Incidentally, on the subject of murder support skills, this game has the loudest lockpicking minigame I've ever heard. Seriously, it's like someone's cocking a shotgun to try to intimidate a tumble dryer full of saucepans. Thank Christ for companies like Epic for games like Gears of War that popularised fat space marines trundling between chest-high walls like they're in wheelchairs. But in 2004, a company called People Can Fly shirked modern trends to create Painkiller, a fast, frantic and shamingly fun evocation of the bygone age and one of my favourite shooters of all time. Wow, said Epic. You really showed us how it's done, People Can Fly. Why don't you step over here for a second? Come on, don't be shy, we're not going to hurt you. Now, drop the net! Hit them with sticks! Like Painkiller, the weapons have all been rather gratifyingly designed to be basically viscerally fun to use. The shotgun sounds like God slamming his car door and is powerful enough to separate a fellow from his entire joy department. Sniper rifle bullets can be carefully guided in slow-mo bullet-o vision directly into an enemy's taint, then exploded. There's a gun that basically attaches remotely detonated suicide bomber vests to people, and you're armed with a lasso and a mighty boot to hurl enemies around the battlefield, into spikes, onto fires, and off cliffs. If you can convince yourself that the basic human enemies all resemble your co-workers, in-laws, and probation officers, then you have everything you need to stave off your workplace shooting rampage for another few grim, tortuous days. You know, it's pretty clear to me why the Helghast have the edge in this war. It's because the ISA is the most badly run military organization since the 47th Light Armored Cat Herding Brigade. Their attitude seems to be, do whatever the fuck you want, and it would be peachy if that happened to roughly coincide with your orders, but don't sweat it. I lost count of how many times characters blatantly defied orders, nothing worse than a stern look. That's how the entire plot kicks off, and no one seems to care. Towards the end, the impression I get is that the main characters finally start following their immediate superiors' orders not out of fear of court-martial, but because they suspect they might be hurting the guy's feelings. Anyway, let it never be said that I'm some ignorant loom-smashing Luddite, because I started playing Killzone 3 not only with the PlayStation Move controls, but also with the 3D option on my new massive 3D TV that I bought with all my ad revenue money. Much obliged, internet. So fuck modern technology right at its cutting edge. Ow! One of the many things I have in common with Captain Picard is that I'm not good with children. Maybe it's because being a video gamer, the mainstream media tends to group me with them, along with autistics, magpies, and stains on the upholstery, but I really wish they'd all fuck off. So the best way to get preemptive revenge for that is to buy up kiddie games I'm not supposed to. Because I bought Kirby's Epic Yarn, somewhere in the world a child cries, and I've got loads of games. That's the funniest thing. That crying child's probably only got like 3, and one of them's a rip-off of Diner Dash, his Nan bought from the rack outside of Mr. Toys. Anyway, rather than the usual routine of going to all the levels and defeating all the bosses, Kirby has to save the world by filing a strongly worded petition with the planning department. Nah, I'm just kidding. You go to all the levels and defeat all the bosses. A Meta Knight boss fight in particular, and I haven't played a lot of Kirby games, but the whole Meta Knight thing seems rather glaringly out of place in a game where the principal antagonists are a fat penguin and some knitwear. It's like an episode of the Care Bears where they all climb into giant mecha suits and sword fight over the last jelly baby. It doesn't seem to matter where you are. Every 50 paces another group of murderers with some contrived grievance teleport in and fight you to the death. You could be strolling through the park on a summer's day and get savaged by a bunch of art students upset that you walked in on their life drawing class. And they always spawn in a few more when you think you're done, like the game revels in the awkwardness of its controls. Hey, Dragon Age 2, I can't even see who I'm fighting because the camera doesn't have the courtesy to look where I'm looking. We know. That's why we just spawned 10 guys directly behind you and now they've killed all your mages. Ha ha hardy. Ha ha. At first you're questing to raise money for a treasure hunting expedition which has unexpected bad shit will go down written all over it in Christmas lights, but then it gets pulled off without a hitch and you return to the city and live rich and comfortable for several years. There's still 2/3 of the game to go. Then you're called in to deal with an uprising, which was sort of hinted at in the previous section, so you start to think maybe this is the overarching story. But then that'll get sorted out and the time skips ahead another few years before the remaining third of the game. The only point anything resembling a world-threatening fantasy adventure story occurs is right at the end for the sequel hook. It's a holding pattern, that's what it is. It's someone being kicked out onto the stage to nervously tell stalling anecdotes while they desperately put the play together. Not so much a hero's journey, so much as a hero piddles around for a while, gobbing off his handsome friend. You know in the intro to Syndicate Wars, where the lad who lives in a dystopian nightmare city has this chip in his head that makes him think he's living in picturesque small-town America? I like to think the protagonists of Pokemon all have the same chips, and in reality are exploring various murky basements with a sack full of rats and mangy attack dogs. Anyway, while challenging gym leaders for the badges that will finally make you a man in the eyes of society, you must also contend with a sinister organization called Team Plasma, who are different to Team Rocket because they're run by a skinny green-haired fellow who is, and let's be reasonable about this, a massive twat. There was a gym fairly early on that might as well have had a big sign on it saying, "We use electric types." Every Johnny in the city asked me none too subtly how I was for ground-type Pokemon, and the whole area was lousy with ground-type random encounters, so after power-leveling some newly caught groundy lads for an hour, I challenged the gym leader, and what does she pull out? A fucking flying electric type, and guess what flying types are immune to? I'll give you a clue, it rhymes with pounding nails into my fucking eyes. Boy, the Japanese are into some weird shit, aren't they? Throughout the course of the plot, you play as 4 individuals with interconnecting storylines and universally inexplicable kung fu skills. Akiyama, a suave moneylender who resembles Alan Wake crossed with Leisure Suit Larry. Saejima, a prison escapee with a face like the San Andreas Fault. Tanimura, a 14-year-old boy who has somehow joined the police force. And Kazuma Kiryu, previous Yakuza games protagonist who's absent for just long enough to make you think the series has moved on, but is smashing faces with the best of them by the second act. Yakuza 4 is a sandbox game in the very peculiarly Japanese style as seen in games like Shenmue and Deadly Premonition. There's a main plot and then there's a whole bunch of unconnected bullshit that makes the main plot seem a lot less urgent. And it's not the kind of sandbox where you can start curb checking passers-by if you get bored. Here, combat may only take place within the designated area. Tokyo apparently has a population with such low self-esteem that having a confident walk is grounds for burly men to beat you to death, and crowds will gather and cheer them along because you deserve it, walking around all smug and emotionally balanced. But to conclude on the story, that takes a bit of a Final Fantasy approach too. Cutscenes run on like the hot water in an Alaskan bathhouse. Nothing is said once that can be said 7 7 times. It's frustrating because unlike Final Fantasy, I actually like some of the characters, but they make it pretty hard for me with all the time they spend pausing for effects or making reaction noises. Nanny. You could stitch them all together and make a pretty funky remix. And the plot as a whole isn't stellar. From a relatively stable starting position, the story goes 8 ways bananas by the end. Everyone who isn't dead betrays each other about 17 times a pace, and the game ends with every single one of them having a big shirtless fist fight on the roof of a tall building like an argument broke out at the homosexual male models base jumpers club. The success of the Wii was like an 8-year-old discovering how fun it was to smear shit on the wallpaper, convincing their younger brothers to join in just as they heard their parents pulling into the driveway and then running off to lock themselves in their room before any consequences would need to be faced. The interesting thing about Nintendo is that they're kind of like Nicolas Cage in that they don't do middle ground. They're either doing really well or shitting a hole straight through the bed. When they get bored of making solid Mario platformers and attracting a strong user base, they create consoles that make your eyes explode and license Team Ninja to make Metroid games. And while I'm unloading on 3D, one of the games I tried was a port of Splinter Cell Chaos Theory with some of the most slapdash 3D-ifying I've ever seen. I refuse to believe that no one at Ubisoft QA put their hand up at any point and said, hey, isn't the sky supposed to be behind the sea? Not that I want to sound like some Grazia reading moral guardian, but I did check and it is extremely possible to make a me who has what looks like a cock for a face. It's equally possible to name him Sin Your Cock on Face and make him your Street Pass ambassador who greets every 3DS owner in the vicinity with the phrase, I'm watching you, in block capitals. For the last few years, I've lived in a world where Nintendo has been constantly misstepping and everyone else been willfully blind to that. But I hope with the 3DS I can now welcome a few of those people to my planet. Come on in, take off your coat, have a seat, not in the big chair. I'm going to sit in that and gloat at you. In the time since then and the release of Portal 2, you'll be pleased to hear that I eventually did come up with a criticism for Portal 1. It's got the worst fucking fans in the world. Nothing ruins a good thing quite like knowing you share your opinions with mindless little tits who bray like mules if you so much as mention the word cake. Alright, let's skip to the end. Is Portal 2 good? Yes. Is it better than Portal 1? No. What you need to understand is that nobody expected Portal 1 to explode the way it did. Valve released it essentially as a stocking stuffer to mollify us into not coming around and breaking their windows. It was all of 2 hours long and developed by a small team within the company who had to cut corners like it was crunch time at the Circle Factory. The continued life of the co-op will depend on additional downloadable levels, not, let me make this totally clear, the unlockable hats and costumes that they currently have, presumably with the attitude of it worked for Team Fortress 2. But did it really work for Team Fortress 2? I don't think so, because one of TF2's strongest features was its visual design, and to the fashion-unconscious masses, Valve should just have said, no, you can't wear whatever hat you like. Hands up everyone in this room who hires professional character designers. Oh, just me. Right, so shut up and wear your fucking Akubra. Symphony of the Night is a Metroidvania-style game. Of course it is. It's literally the game that contributed the second half of that word. A 2D platformer with free-roaming exploration in which you play... for some reason the Japanese have this thing where they think spelling Dracula backwards is really fucking clever. Alucard, the son of Count Dracula, who can only move around with a forwards moonwalk, and if you're playing the XBLA version on a widescreen TV, there'll be massive big pictures of Alucard and Dracula on either side of the screen glaring at each other for the whole game, like both are waiting for the other to own up to eating all of Mrs. Dracula's pies. What surprises me is how easy Skimpy Nighty gets by the end, because if there's one thing that usually characterizes retro games, it's that they're about as forgiving as playing the floor is lava on the surface of Mercury. You know your series is having problems when inserting Batman doesn't seem to improve things at all, so after many years of rolling disinterestedly around on an unmopped kitchen floor, Mortal Kombat is finally getting the boot. The reboot, that is, taking the plot right back to the start with all the least unpopular characters. The story mode pulls a bit of a Dallas by implying that the entire series up to now was a flash-forward Raiden was having at the start of the very first game, a rather lengthy and tortured flash-forward with fluctuating graphical quality and several dubious retcons. The X-ray moves in particular give the impression that your character's stepfather was a skeleton and they still have some issues to work through. The way the camera zooms in and shows the victim's bones as they splinter like dry twigs is exactly the same way one would film a cum shot. It's not pleasant. Not that I can't handle a bit of gore, but it gives me the same feeling I get from watching midget on giraffe porn, a sense of, I'm certainly not getting off to this, but I know someone in the world is, and that's what makes me uncomfortable. Perhaps the logical step will be to just have one big fighting game featuring every character from every franchise ever, and then just update that every few months. If nothing else, it'd silence a lot of drunken arguments. Who would win in a fight between Marty McFly and the bloke from Quantum Leap? Why not debate this in the comments as a brief moment of respite from your extremely important life? Do you remember a time when video games weren't all about bold new shotgun-based interior design techniques? Those intellectual days of the point-and-click adventure when games were comfortable about testing the player's skills beyond the ability to line up a set of crosshairs with the softest and gushiest regions of a shouting murderer? Don't you long for the days when you'd methodically track your mouse pointer across every pixel on the screen to find more inventory items to run around rubbing on every interactive object in the game in the hope of finding a way onto the one solitary thread of logic that was about as straightforward as a cow's digestive system? No? Good, because neither does Rockstar. L.A. Noire tells the story of Cole Phelps, an experimental crime-solving robot named after the fuel on which his internal boiler runs. Cole PH31P5's firm grasp of robot logic and inability to be shaken by naked sliced-up tarts makes him a natural crime scene investigator, but he does have problems with emotions. Whenever he's called upon to shout down a grieving widower, he always looks like anger is a concept he's only ever heard about from improperly inserted punch cards. Investigation Compilation begins with scouring the crime scenes for clues. Now, obviously the designers hit the issue that you can't make every item in the crime scene examinable, or some players will spend hours sifting through cigarette butts, but you can't just make the important clues interactable because PH31P5 isn't supposed to be a psychic robot. So the compromise is that every now and again Cole will be walking around a crime scene and get momentarily really fucking excited about a discarded fag packet or a spoon, until he can hold it up to his face and satisfy himself that it's not the legendary Rizzler of Christ. It's not clear if doubt means to raise a single disbelieving robot eyebrow or start accusing them of masterminding the Cuban Missile Crisis. For example, in one of the very first cases, I find a car crash victim's spectacles that clearly state they are old and been recently repaired, but his wife said he just got a brand new pair, so I said she was lying, whereupon PH31P5 activated his wild accusations circuits and accused her of secretly being Mrs. Hitler. Gameplay hot tip: always accuse them of lying first, because if they aren't, you have the option of backing out, but if they are, they'll always say something like, "I bet you haven't got a single shred of evidence that I'm married to Hitler," which will provide an incredibly massive hint to present the Hitler marriage certificate you found earlier. At one point, a recently stabbed corpse has a movie ticket in their hand, which is apparently supposed to translate to, "The suspect is in that movie theatre right now, having a shootout with gangsters." At another point, I had to pick one of two suspects to finger, and both their cases seemed flimsy as fuck, but the game yelled at me for 5 minutes straight for picking the wrong one and gave me a bad rating. Very next case, we discover it was actually another guy, and I was right to think the cases were flimsy, and the game didn't even have the decency to apologise. Hey everyone, let's all be PC gamers, let's all talk on Skype and change our desktop wallpapers and play proper games with mouses and keyboard, while you wait all day for the fucking update to download and then cross your bronzed muscular PC gaming fingers that the damn thing will even work. But it's so much purer than console gaming, isn't it, where you wait all day for the PSN to come back online and then cross your bloated, filth-encrusted console gaming fingers that your credit card details aren't being hacked by African warlords. The Witcher 2 starts out a bit Game of Thronesy, with white-haired STD archive waiting to happen Geralt of Rivia suddenly being BFFs with the king after saving him from an assassin, although Geralt's new status as assassin repellent swiftly takes a severe hit when another assassin shows up and gets the job done properly. Wrongly accused, Geralt goes on the run to pursue the real killer, like the fugitive, but with elves and nobbing. Why do I even have an inventory screen if double-clicking on every single item makes the game slap you across the wrist and say, "No, we do that from a different screen. No, we won't tell you which one, and put on a fucking tie. Where were you raised? Azeroth?" The writing? Yeah, it's alright. It's dark, like every other fantasy game these days, meaning that people say fuck all the time and everyone's a racist asshole. I just know that the very first comment on this video, after all the usual ones saying first and getting immediately banned, will be someone demanding to know why I haven't done Duke Nukem Forever within the 12 minutes since it came out. Not that I'm bitter, so here's Hunted the Demon's Forge, a shit game for twats. No, really, I'm not bitter. Trust me when I say that Hunted needs no assistance from circumstance to come across as a shit game for twats. It could be the only distraction available in a house that's slowly sinking into a lava flow, and it'd still be a shit game for twats, because a non-twat would presumably move to a different house. These two zany funsters have a great chemistry in the sense that I hope they both get dissolved in acid. I was buoyed by the ongoing promise of a boss fight with a giant spider that kept appearing over the horizon, like the bedroom eyes of a courtesan peering coquettishly over her fan. And then finally the giant spider found a window in its meeting schedule and chased me through a big cave for a bit before I lobbed 2 bombs at it and dropped a rock on its head. "Exciting," said I. "Can I fight it now?" "What do you mean it's dead?" What, we're just going to move on? Well, this'll teach me not to open my big fat cake socket. There goes old man Yahtzee, cried the children of the village. He's the chump who decided that just because Duke Nukem Forever hadn't come out in 13 years and its developers had gone down the plug hole, that it was safe to make a joke review that hinged entirely on Duke Nukem Forever never actually seeing the light of day. But now it has, and he has so much egg on his face that you could slap him with a frying pan and call him an omelette. Har, har, har. To which I reply, that's quite a needlessly complicated chant you've got going on there, children of the village, but the point of my joke review, which I'm not surprised has slipped by your fetal alcohol syndrome addled minds, was not Duke Nukem Forever will never be released, but Duke Nukem Forever probably should never be released, because nothing they produce could live up to 13 years of anticipation. 12 years after their first invasion, the aliens have finally finished pushing their eyeballs back in and their ghoulies back out and are ready for round 2. At the start, there's a certain ambiguity as to whether they're invading or showing up with an apology fruit basket and whether or not it's Duke who opens the hostilities. I thought, perhaps they're taking the story in a more complex direction as Duke is forced to mature and understand that his actions have consequences, but then Duke slapped some tits on a wall and I said, well, never fucking mind. It starts off campy and colourful in a Sin, Blood 2, The Chosen kind of way, then it moves into the dark, sweaty, unpleasant Doom 3, Prey, Quake 4 period when you go into the alien hive, and incidentally this section contains about as jarring a shift of tone as you can get without splicing 5 minutes of the human centipede into the middle of mall rats. And by the last mission, Duke has finally embraced the FPSs of today, meaning you run around a grey-brown industrial area for a while, then get a shit ending. Even as I played, that part of me that takes an almost sexual joy in ruining other people's fun turned upon myself and said, Yahtzee, you and I both know that you have pushed games off subway train platforms when they had less problems problems than this. Oh god, you're right, there's just no excuse for loading times this long unless you're a fucking removals van. So, this is how the anticipation ends, people. First show of the long-awaited comeback tour, and the singer's hanged himself on the microphone cord. But he's trying to sing anyway, forcing on a smile and choking out lyrics in between grotesque spasms, and you're wondering whether it's kinder to cut him down or swing on his legs to help him on his way. As you proceed through the plot, the loading screens inform you in foreboding white-on-black text how many miles the beast has left to hike before it hits town, keeping the tension high like a sword of Damocles with its knob out. I'm not too proud to admit that I was welling up at Infamous 2's good ending. A little bit. Well, not much at all, really. It was more like just stoically nodding my head while doing some squat thrusts and grunting. Look, if you have two equally viable, equally difficult solutions to a problem, say humanely suffocating your costly vegetative wife with a pillow, or digging through to her femoral arteries with a cheese grater, then the evil option, which if you're having trouble keeping up is the second one, is just irrational, and you can't relate to a character whose actions don't make any fucking sense. American, presumably named when his parents got the boxes confused when they were filling in his birth certificate, made a couple of games that are remembered alongside botched prostate surgery, and one game that is vaguely fondly considered American McGee's Alice by American McGee, which has now received an HD re-release for those interested in their gaming history. And what's that? Oh, apparently they've tacked on some other game. Incidentally, American now operates out of China, which is beautifully ironic in an almost prophetic kind of way. Alice, who looks for all the world like a spoon, trying out its new contact lenses, is living in an orphanage in a grim depiction of Victorian London falling somewhere between Jacob's Ladder and Wallace and Gromit when the titular madness returns like an obnoxious neighbour who comes over uninvited, looks through your cupboards and rearranges your spice rack. Like the first Alice, Return of the Madness is primarily a platformer, which you don't see a lot of these days because platforming in full 3D has often proved itself to be like juggling with handkerchiefs in a wind tunnel. The first game had a real problem where the slightest keystroke would launch Alice as if from a trebuchet, and every platform felt like it was covered in ice cubes and ball bearings. But this new one adds not only a slow fall mechanic, but an honest-to-bugger-nuts quadruple jump, which solves the problem, some might say rather drastically, like putting down a dangerous pit bull terrier with a tactical carpet bombing. Virtually every chapter ends with a confrontation with perverted Wonderland figure du jour that then gets swiftly resolved in another bloody concept art cutscene. It's like the end of Monty Python and the Holy Grail without the justification of spoof. It's like if they ran out of money at the end of Terminator 2 and finished it off by flashing some pencil drawings in front of the camera showing the T-1000 falling into the molten steel after he slips on a banana skin. Now, SWTOR, bless his heart, tends to have what you might call a long-distance relationship with normalcy, but his tag team seems to be holding his leash pretty tightly on this one. Getting past the rather alarmingly generic title, Shadows of the Damned tells the story of a demon hunter named, brace yourself, Garcia fucking Hotspur. And I think his middle name actually is fucking, because in the subtitle it's got a capital F like a proper noun, who must battle through hell to rescue his girlfriend from the demon lord. It's probably the closest to a standard plot SWTOR's ever done. It's probably what he'd come up with if they asked him to make a Mario game. So for a while, I didn't really feel like I was playing a SWTOR 5.1 game, but then something happened that I think deserves to be recounted in full. Garcia has an amusing buddy movie partnership with Johnson, a sort of well-spoken lost soul from Doom who can turn into a motorbike, which thrums mightily between Garcia's thighs, or a handgun called the Boner. At one point in the game, you require some heavier artillery, so Johnson calls a phone sex line, which causes his barrel to extend by about 5 feet and turns him into the Big Boner, which Garcia holds right in front of his crotch and fires by thrusting his hips forward and yelling, "Taste my big boner." Oh, there you are, SWTOR, you randy old bastard. And here's the extent of the sense I can extract from the plot. A research company named Cognitive Dissonance plc kidnapped or grew or built from Meccano an incredibly psychic girl named Alma in an attempt to engineer an army of psychic super soldiers, forcing her to give birth to 2 brothers to act as the psychic commanders, not realizing that her psychic power allows her to create a psychic distortion of psychic reality and psychic bendy spoons. After Alma psychically destroys a city at the end of Fear 1 and gets herself psychic preggers again at the end of Fear 2, Christ must be a generous child welfare scheme in this reality, along with the complete absence of corporate regulation, and the 2 original sons must team up to confront their mother and complain about their new stepdad. I don't know, I lost track of all this around the time of the first game's intro sequence. And by the way, if there is anything less scary than a tactical shooter, it's a co-op tactical shooter, so Fear's continued attempts to be a horror franchise fall flatter than ever. Ooh, the lights flickered and a chair moved across the room. Sorry, I didn't notice because I was busy teasing my brother about his implied desire to fuck our mum. Better make sure your house is earthquake-proof because this may rock your world. I'd never played Ocarina of Time all the way through before, and apparently this is like a movie critic never having watched Citizen Kane, or a food critic never having tasted savoury. It's one of the best games ever and a part of gaming history, or at least that's what everyone who owned an N64 tells me. The same people who, nostalgia quivering gelatonously in their eyes, will tell me with a straight face that GoldenEye still totally holds up. I know your N64 showed you more affection as a child than your parents ever did, but you have to realise Nintendo is like a stripper. They don't actually like you, they just pretend to so that you give them your money. I started the game and I always like to name Link something that adds a frisson to the dialogue, so in this case I tried Fuck Me, which seems seems to be the subtext of every conversation Link has with a female character, to use the word conversation generously. This one did get a bit nonsensical at times, but it added a certain emphasis to certain moments, like when I walked into the ice caverns and my little dipshit fairy friend said, "Fuck me, it's cold in here." Ocarina of Time starts with a big tree, calls your underage ass over, and says, "Hey, guess who's going out to save the kingdom? Here's a hint. It's the person in this room who isn't rooted to the fucking floor." I had to consult GameFAQs on 2 occasions to finish Ocarina of Time. Once to figure out I had to produce a fish to get the big manatee thing to eat me, because honestly, why should he need more incentive with Link flashing those tasty gams of his all the time? And once when an important cutscene wouldn't trigger until I entered the room through the correct door. What is this, the fucking Academy Awards? I'd heard a lot of people talk up the water dungeon as some legendary puller of plonkers, but I breezed through on a single plane flight, not even an international one, just 2 hours domestic, and I spent the first half hour of it staring into space. Check the rooms you haven't been to yet, guys. It's not rocket science. Yes, I am saying that I'm smarter than you were when you were 12. Look at me. Up until now, I thought Twilight Princess was pretty good, but my opinion worsens now I see it was working from a cheat sheet. The first thing you must do is pick which one you're playing as, and don't worry if you haven't figured out which one you dislike the least yet, because you'll hate every single one of them equally by the end of all this. You'll resent the one you're playing as just for being the flea-bitten mule on which you ride through this rubbish, and you'll resent the other two for constantly taking the piss out of your aiming skills, even while they themselves try and fail to snipe an obese pig that's been lashed to a tree 6 feet away. They were also never programmed to drive, so in the occasional vehicle section, if you perhaps would rather take riding shotgun to its literal heart, then fuck you and your haughty airs. The AI will pile into the backseat without a word and just look at you like a dog with its leash in its mouth. And as I said, they can't aim for shit, but after you've single-handedly cleared out an entire room, they'll unfailingly say the one of their 4 or 5 endlessly repeated lines that goes, "You don't have to do this all by yourself, you know. There is no middle finger big enough." From Dust, a new game from Eric Chahi, and those of you who weren't testicle spelunkers in the early 90s may remember him as the developer behind the groundbreaking and atmospheric Another World. That's out of this world if your country is dumb. The main character is not a ginger dork in a t-shirt, but a magic glowing snake with the power to move terrain around on a terrifying scale. You have to help the little masked men found a set number of villages and fend off environmental hazards like floods and lava, because magical glowing snakes lack the communication skills to suggest their masters build a village somewhere other than an active volcano mouth, you stupid gibbering tits. Catherine comes to us from the creators of the Persona games, which were about spending half the time battling monsters in a dream and the other half trapped in a high school anime and being unable to say which was the more nightmarish. Catherine, by contrast, is about spending half the time battling monsters in a dream and the other half trapped in a 30-something romance anime. So fittingly enough for a game about monogamy, the developers certainly seem to be married to a concept. You play Vincent Brooks, a man-boy approaching maturity like it's a Bengal tiger who is going out with a frumpy and controlling but stable lady called Catherine with a K, and just as he's feeling pressured to show more commitment, he's seduced by a free-spirited but obviously completely fucking psychotic bitch called Catherine with a C. Won't that get confusing in spoken dialogue? Asked one Atlas employee. Yes, replied his friend, but on the upside we won't have to re-record the voices depending on which one the player's going after. Ultimately, the game is about choosing between Catherine or Catherine representing mature stability and Catherine representing youthful freedom. I knew this would get confusing. It'd be fair to call Catherine a story-driven game, and I guess the biggest problem I have with the story is that Vincent is such a fucking tool. Catherine, that psycho Catherine, not frumpy Catherine, basically bullies him into getting seduced by her. Yeah, maybe her running around in a net curtain might have helped, but still. And if the dude could take 5 seconds to just explain things rather than stammer out more lies while sweating like James Murdoch at a government hearing, then he could probably sort everything out. But no, he just accepts guilt and whines about it incessantly to his mates, every single one of whom will be well within their rights to powerbomb his face into the nearest bollard. Oh, don't look at me like that. It's a slow release week. Mind you, I was a keen repeat customer to the magnet gun. This is a thing that lets you fire 2 hooks who are still in the first giddy weeks of being in passionate love with each other. So once they're both fired, they speed towards each other as the music swells, bringing with them whatever terrain or enemy they happen to be attached to. It's a sound strategy, and perhaps more importantly, a right laugh to make a targeted monster bounce up and down off a stucco ceiling like a salivating yo-yo, but it has the same problem as the biscuit buildings in that it's just kind of there. The potential exists for interesting physics challenges like puzzle bosses, or perhaps a sequence where you have to force an assembly of stubborn school children to applaud an unpopular classmate. Near the end, Darius snogs his love interest and she's literally dead before a minute has elapsed. Luckily he didn't go down on her, she might have spontaneously combusted. By this point the game's primary antagonist had been dead for about 2 hours, so just as I was wondering what the hell else I could possibly have left to do, the game pulled from its arse that all the insects will instantly drop dead if Darius repairs the terraforming machine that the cultists destroyed 3 years previously at the start of the game. Darius goes to the terraformer in an alarmingly fast off-screen journey, and his magic flashlight fixes it inside 5 minutes. Then the aliens die, the sky's clear, and there's a rainbow. Not to dampen your sense of victory, Darius mate, but why didn't you do that 3 years ago right after it broke? You dumb bald twat. Any situation could be handled by any character build, within reason. I mean, unless your brain is some kind of permanent consolation prize and you've been putting all your points into swimming and poison resistance in case you have to visit Queensland. There were moments in Deus Ex when a boss character would show up for a fight, but you could just run straight past them and slam the door in their face. Why hasn't any other game character ever thought of that? But Deus Ex Human Revolution centralizes the debate surrounding transhuman augmentation. Would you, it asks, supplement your body with machinery? What do you mean, would I? I already wear spectacles and a wristwatch, and I always carry a phone which I am currently in the process of duct taping to the side of my head. Adam is chief of security for a major biotech firm developing human augmentations when he's severely wounded in an attack on the labs by mercenaries. His company then puts so many bits of machinery inside him that he technically has to hold a heavy goods vehicle license before he's allowed to walk down the street. Well, since this is a prequel, Adam is presumably a precursor to the obsolete mechs from Deus Ex 1, which seems odd because Adam's augs are all really sleek and Gunter Herman looked like he'd spent a few years banging his head on the Large Hadron Collider. Some upgrades are literally useless. Strangest of all is a hacking upgrade that shows you the probability of setting off an alert, apparently unaware that the minigame already does that if you just click on the node. I'm guessing 1 or 2 post-it notes fell off a programmer's monitor somewhere down the line. After evading a bunch of totally ineffectual enemies who are basically turned into the Sploicers from Bioshock and a completely incomprehensible thing I hesitate to call a final boss fight when it seems more like the kind of nightmare Philip K. Dick might have while being spooned by H.R. Geiger, Adam is then hustled to what I like to call the Ending Tron 3000, a big machine with 4 huge conspicuous buttons, each of which gives a different ending. But all 4 endings are just spliced sequences of stock footage with a voiceover from Adam talking about what an awesome dude he is for making that choice. There's no payoff at all, no glimpse of the world our choice created, or what became of the characters, no word on whether your techie support guy ever managed to dislodge that tree branch from up his bum. It's possible they're saving that for DLC, but anyone who pulls that shit deserves to have their hands cut off, and sold back to them for 1,200 Microsoft points. You want to hear something crazy? Tittyfuck Labrador swimming up the Nile. Do you want to hear something crazy but also coherent? Julia Roberts was once hospitalized for swallowing an entire vole. Do you want to hear something crazy but also coherent and true? Driver San Francisco may end up being in my top 5 of the year. There's also rather obnoxious rubber banding at times. Haha, yes, I can swing the driving game lingo now. To the point that most of what you do during a race doesn't amount to shit until the last few checkpoints. Once I was in last place and spun out 2 checkpoints before the end, so I decided to wait sulkily by the side of the road until the mission failed and I could restart. But it didn't fail. All my fucking opponents parked around the next bend waiting for me to catch up for a halfway exciting finish, the condescending gits. Still, let's indulge some weird fantasies one more time with Dead Island. No one's done a zombie game set in a holiday resort yet, have they? Except Dead Rising 2 and Left 4 Dead 2. Oh, fuck off. You're staying at a hotel on the island resort of Benoy, which is named after the sound I make when I'm both confused and aroused at the same time. According to the intro movie, you spent an enjoyable evening getting completely dog-buggered, and you must have gotten pretty impressively drunk because you have an altercation with yourself at one point. It's complicated. Being one of those infuriating fucks who don't get hangovers, you wake up fresh and raring to go with the hotel and resort infested with the undead, and this begins an adventure that is the unnatural spunk baby produced by a mutual masturbation session between Borderlands and Dead Rising 2, during which lingering eye contact was made with Left 4 Dead. Don't worry, grief-stricken survivor, the troubled soul of your loved one is now at rest. I jumped on her head and I swear her lower jaw went 50 feet. Characters you have to escort don't follow you. They run on ahead and have a curious blind spot to vehicles. I swear more than once I found myself driving a car very slowly alongside an escort character on foot, saying, hey, more power to you for getting your cardio, but you probably wouldn't be picking so much of yourself out of other people's teeth if you got in the fucking car. Please, you can pick the radio station? To close my arguments, Dead Island can go spoon a fucking lathe. So here we go, another bloody brown shooter for the current age with 2 weapon slots, cover mechanics and regenerating health. Wait, what are these glowing green things lying around everywhere? Medkits, you call them? What an intriguing novelty. Yes, Resistance 3 does not have regenerating health. Holy bum nuggets, I'm having to desperately seek aid under fire while hopping around on my last remaining limb and things are actually tense and exciting. Oh, but it's small comfort if I can't carry 10 weapons at once. I can carry 10 weapons at once. Huh. And there's a freeze ray and a lightning rod and a thing I like to call the Jimi Hendrix experience because it makes people puke themselves to death. They're quite fun to use, and there are no cover mechanics because the game assumes you can strategically use a wall without having to rub yourself on it and give it kisses. Sony, are you alright? I'm not complaining or anything, but I'm kind of feeling like how the Greeks might have felt if the Trojans had just surrendered before the wooden horse was finished. The overarching plot is really just a weak framing device for a handful of different encounters along the course of a post-apocalyptic road trip, such as a nighttime chapter set in a slightly non-linear abandoned coal mining town, infested with the undead, during which you team up with the town's slightly mad priest and... wait a shotgun-cocking second, that's a word-for-word description of Ravenholm from Half-Life 2. Now I think about it, fighting techno-soldier ex-humans converted by a nebulous alien agenda smacks more than a little of Half-Life 2's Combine... Chimera? They both start with C and have 7 letters. That can't be a coincidence. And look, Insomniac Games. If you rearrange the letters, lose some of them, and add a few more, you get We Want to Be Valve. Giving the benefit of the doubt, Resistance 3 is very solid and well worth a wait a minute. The scientist has a beard. What did you do with the rest of the body, Insomniac? So Marcus Phoenix and his grizzled backing vocalists are back, and as always, if they didn't occasionally stand next to the 2 token willowy hotties, you could be forgiven for thinking you'd accidentally set your TV to a wider aspect ratio. Fat-necked gorillas wearing fridges with armholes to a man, and they're all living on a ship and having to deal with a new race of snarly monsters. Apparently different to the previous race of snarly monsters, but not in any practical way. Suddenly, someone who's apparently important drops in with news that Marcus's dad is still alive, and he's also apparently important, so everyone goes off to look for him in the most circuitous possible way. If it sounds like I don't have the firmest grip on what exactly is going on in Gears of War, it's because I bloody well don't. But having played Resistance 3 and a bit of that hard reset thing on Steam that's like Painkiller if they'd nicked one of Philip K. Dick's least comprehensible plots, it mystifies me how anyone can think Gears of War is a better shooter. It's the original chest-high wall plot apocalypse. I hate how sprinting makes the camera headbang like it's at a Meatloaf gig, as if to say, moving quickly in Gears of War, not without a migraine you don't. Of all the big names getting their trilogies tied this year, Gears of War I consider one of the least likely to get a last-minute death row reprieve. It's a relic of a previous age, too dull for a reboot. I'm already forgetting stuff about Gears of War 3. I remember that one major character dying in a heroic sacrifice, Natch, but I couldn't tell you why it was necessary. Already my memory bank has looked at that fact and gone, yep, this needs to go. Need to make room for an extension on the cleavage department. And I'm going to throw a little impromptu competition here. If you haven't played Hard Reset yet, I want you to download it now, play through the entire game once to the end. Don't worry, it's not very long, it's independent, so the money ran out faster, and then come back here and explain to me what the plot was about in 25 words or less. It's something to do with evil robots invading the city because of an evil scientist, but it turns out he's not evil or something, and they use the word nanomachines like Hideo Kojima's dictaphone broke. There's really no way of saying this without giving ammunition to conservative anti-game campaigners, but there isn't as much fun to be had in shooting robots as there is in shooting organic life forms. When I fire a rocket into a cluster of charging monsters, I like to know that the cleanup will have to be done with a mop rather than a broom. It's hard to explain, but surely we can all agree that the lawnmower scene from Brain Dead just wouldn't have been as memorable if it had been taking place in the audiovisual department at Harvey Norman's. Yes, it's id Software, the creators of Doom and Quake, as the front cover of Rage is quick to remind us, the widely respected veteran of the shooter genre, who lives in constant terror that anyone will notice that their stripes and medals are made of aluminium foil and milk bottle tops. The 2 games given as evidence of their skill are both so old that they could probably be run on a sheet of corrugated cardboard with holes punched in it, and you'll note that Rage's box art makes no reference to anything they developed more recently, like Doom 3 or Quake 3, respectively a flashlight with a Halloween mask taped to it and a load of old wank. Call me a cynic, please, it's my only sense of identity. It seems increasingly true that AAA games have been skipping meals so they can buy the most glittery dresses, and now it looks like they've started sticking their fingers down their throats. How does it make sense that a 3 CD game on the PlayStation could last you for weeks, but a 3 DVD game 2 generations later can be fired off in a weekend? id Software are certainly world-class engine programmers, but engaged they cannot. Don't see myself ever being thrilled to my very soul by particularly good volumetric lighting. And while I was able to deduce that the Microsoft Kinect would be a crap gaming system simply by using my magnificent brain, I recently picked one up anyway, because Pope Urban VIII probably thought he was very clever when he condemned Galileo. But who got the last laugh there? Well, he did when Galileo died in poverty and dishonor, but what I'm saying is that I'm basically like the Pope. Yeah, I know, game, use my left hand to shoot down the purple projectiles before they hit me. Now, in what specific way did you envision me using my left hand? Because that could mean anything from waving it to sticking a bowling pin up a gorilla's ass. You play a character whose name I forget, so we'll just call him Phineas K. Duschenstein, who is riding a train through Europe with his sexy wife when it crashes in the middle of nowhere and the wife is kidnapped and taken to a nearby Gothic castle, and your only option is to go off in pursuit while all around you young attractive people with a broad variety of European accents get murdered in nasty ways. So basically it's Donkey Kong as directed by Eli Roth, if he spent most of the production locked in his trailer playing Resident Evil 4. And, you know, funnily enough, I actually quite like the game's atmosphere and it's not incompetently paced. I could get into it if I could use a controller that didn't give me verrucas, but the environments are kind of small, so if I could just pop out my slow-ass forklift and jog the exit, then it'd probably lose a lot of its pacing. I think it's a mistake to entirely control a game like this with Kinect. Motion controls haven't gotten any less unimmersive now that it can vaguely tell whether or not you're trying to strangle yourself. I've been a little busy working at the junkyard crushing cars between my muscles to read comic book. Evil neckbeard Hugo Strange persuades the authorities to put a big wall around a large section of Gotham City's slums and call it an internment camp, where all the major villains can fight it out for control and the Riddler can run around with a team of contractors grappling hooks and spelunking equipment leaving question marks everywhere, because it will in some way prove that he's smarter than an emotionally retarded bloke in a pointy hat. And then when Bruce Wayne suggests that this might not be the smartest way to rehabilitate people, he gets arrested and thrown in there without trial. What I'm saying is that unless Hugo Strange has also been crowned king of the human race, I don't see how he can swing all this without provoking a few letters to the editor. And you also get to play as Catwoman, Batman's sexy frenemy, who paid for an entire jumpsuit but isn't getting her money's worth on the zipper, if you see what I mean. She's also a lot less fun to explore the city with, because instead of glidey wings and hook shots, her method of getting around is to whip onto the tops of buildings and then smash straight into a wall. Then she has to hop her way up the wall in a sort of no really I meant to do that kind of way, leaving another bloody imprint of her increasingly two-dimensional face to congeal on the brickwork. My spirits were raised at one point when it seemed we were about to have a flying vehicle section in a jet plane until my character sat in the gunner's seat and I realised shit was going down rail shooter style, except for the modern-day missile targeting and shooting system, which is about as involving and skillful as heating up a sponge pudding in the microwave. Just look at those clouds, sighed the game with a dreamy lack of awareness. Maybe you could make a flight simulator in Frostbite 2, don't you think so, publishers? Well, since you want me to notice the engine so much, EA, it's got more pop-in than a warehouse full of jam jar lids, and I made a game out of spinning around really fast trying to catch blurry textures before they loaded back in. I had to escort a comrade with a wounded prisoner out of a building and be picked up by an osprey outside, but it turned out the terrorists were using the building for their annual bullet sampling party, and since my colleague felt there was no better body armor than a mission-critical prisoner, I had to go out and shield them with the sturdier parts of my face. And then we got outside, fighting off terrorists as we went, and once he was inside the osprey, I ran out of cover to follow before bouncing off a big fat invisible wall at the bottom of the ramp and being turned into a bullets and combat gear burrito. Escape not sufficiently exciting, went the game. You must reach a minimum level of excitement before continuing. You must reach a minimum level of suck my cock, Battlefield 3. I've said some mean things about the Uncharted series, like how it's about a smug American cunt so massive that it could use Cleopatra's Needle as a sex aid who remorselessly commits large-scale archaeological destruction without even the level-headed justification of a serial arsonist. From mixed skin colours in Drake's Fortune and Russians in Among Thieves, we're now on to Englishmen being mowed down by the hundreds. For fuck's sake, Naughty Dog, I want to be proven wrong on this. If you do Uncharted 4, please have him murder an American. Just one, just for me, or an Australian, because at least then I'll know you're deliberately trying to piss me off. The game opens in London, with Drake walking off cobbled streets into an English pub with a motherfucking red phone box out the front, where every single member of the clientele looks like Grant Mitchell from EastEnders. Now, I've always assumed that the foreign locales in previous games were at least researched to some degree, but now I'm forced to call that into question, because the equivalent of this would be walking into Central Park and seeing a load of Prohibition-era gangsters feeding the ducks by shooting bread out of Tommy guns. As we've established, the set pieces are what lie at the core of Uncharted. There's an entire non-sequitur ship section that adds fuck all to the plot and exists only because someone wanted to see a big old ocean liner get fucked up. That'll teach it. Also because they wanted Drake to run down a corridor away from inrushing water, which I think has only been used in around 60 or 70 disaster movies, and kill the player dead if they hesitate or run in the wrong direction for more than a nanosecond, which is still better than doing it all in a cutscene at least, but sometimes the game seems to go about set pieces the same way John Belushi went about Speedball, and things can start to feel a bit predetermined a lot of the time. How many times is something going to break off when Drake tries to climb on it, because he's got no right to be surprised anymore? For me, Modern Warfare 3's plot makes its signature turn right around the bend when Russia invades Europe, as in all of it, simultaneously. Now, I've never invaded Europe, except for that one time, but I would think that's a project you might want to stagger out a bit if you haven't forged an alliance with any galactic empires lately. For what it's worth, Battlefield 3 is more realistic. You die much easier under fire, and sniper bullets even have drop-off. Wow, drop-off? I love that, because it reminds me of my flaccid, impotent cock. The driving plot point of Modern Warfare 3 is tracking down the Russian president who was kidnapped on his way to working out a peace treaty with the West. Now, if the Russian government was committed enough to peace that he was already on the plane puckering up for some imperialist bottom-kissing, who the hell gave the order to invade Europe? Because when the president finally does get into that meeting with the Western powers, there are going to be some fucking awkward items on the agenda. Full-scale chemical weapon attacks on civilians, that's a hard thing to blame on a few bad apples. I think the problem might lie with the orchard, Mr. President. You might want to stop watering it with liquidized children. In the grand tradition of Elder Scrolls games, you start off imprisoned for an unspecified crime. When will the authorities of Tamriel learn? If you keep locking people up for minor adventure-related crimes, they'll just be surrounded by other adventurers and be more likely to adventure again when they get out. Still, the Empire insists they're taking their war on adventure policy seriously, but just as you're about to be executed, the town is attacked by Godzilla. Because I made the mistake once of hoarding all the potions of resist frost and poisons of stamina weakness in case I needed them, but I never needed them because it's quicker to just bash people around the chops while necking health potions, and anything else might as well be so much Vegemite. I had 15,000 gold and nothing to spend it on, except training, I suppose. Oh, look at Sir Alan Sugar over here, is too rich and important to adventure properly. Would you like to skip to the ending cutscene because you have to go and buy a new aeroplane before the shops shut? Skyrim has that pleasant water cooler quality where every person you discuss it with has a different experience, but after a while the conversation will turn into a glitch swapping party. My best one was an old lady hovering 20 feet in the air before disappearing into the ground before my eyes. I never even knew her name, but I will always remember you, hovering ground lady. And when you're talking to characters, none of them seem to be particularly interested in what they're saying, and other characters very rudely walk up while you're talking and bark some random local trivia at your face. It's like I'm trapped on the planet of the Spurg Lords. Saints Row III is set in a whole new city, Steelport, which in bold contrast to the previous city of Stillwater is called something different. Perhaps it's time to relearn the other thing Grand Theft Auto forgot, that you could always set your sandbox city somewhere other than New York, like Coventry perhaps, although in that case when you inevitably get bored and want to commit suicide from the tallest building, you'd probably have to join a queue. This is a trilogy progression we academics call Evil Dead Syndrome, and I'm not sure I like it. The funny parts of Saints Row 2 shone all the brighter alongside its more POV-based aspect. It's when you're wearing full Lucha Libre gear thwacking at zombies with a big floppy dildo as part of the every
everyday routine that it starts to feel less special, and a lot of the side missions are the same. The main difference is that now there's no little cutscene at the start in which a character explains why blasting liquid feces all over someone's property is in any way rational. No, you just press the button to start the activity, and then you're driving around with a tiger in the passenger seat or pouring banana milkshakes down people's trousers or something equally wacky. The big new side mission is a hilarious Japanese-style game show where you run around shooting dudes like you always do, but in an atmosphere of such dense wackiness that if you breathe it in too much, then your lungs turn into balloon animals. The story deals with the Third Street Saints having sold out and become media celebrities, reduced to cartoonish, marketable parodies of their former selves, and one could draw a very clear parallel between that and this game as a whole, waving its multicoloured top hat in farewell to whatever seriousness remained in the property. Could this perhaps have been an intentional subtext? No, of course it wasn't. To assume sophistication on the part of a game that would have you smack passers-by into trees with a giant wobbling dick is like assuming a birthday party stripper is trying to get you to check her for breast cancer. It's not impossible, but why would she be wearing a policewoman's helmet? Imagine you walking to a lovely party with your friend Adrian Assassin's Creed, and on the way the two of you find a discarded top hat in a sewer drain, whereupon Adrian puts it on and does an elaborate and spellbinding 5-minute performance of Singing in the Rain on the nearest lamppost, and you are astonished by this sudden display of hitherto unknown talent, but then as you pass another lamppost he performs exactly the same routine, and you laugh good-naturedly and say, alright, we've had a lot of fun with this, but we really do need to get to this party now, but he responds by launching into the routine a third time, and then you notice a grim, tortured expression on his face, and your mutual friend Yolanda Ubisoft arrives and sucks all the money out of your pocket. So if the hidden blade, sword, dagger, crossbow, unarmed combat, throwing knives, other hidden blade, poison darts, pushing people off rooftops, and a motherfucking gun weren't quite enough murder variety for you, then now you get to craft bombs from a variety of materials. There's the classic shrapnel bomb if you want your victims' next door neighbours to see what happens when you make poor choices in life, the more subtle poison bomb if you enjoy sparking impromptu dance parties, and the blood bomb that makes enemies think they've been wounded so you can run up and wound them for realsies. Or just use the poison bomb, you fucking show off. The best thing one could say about Revelations is that it does make the effort to decisively wrap up the stories of Altair and Ezio so we can finally move on to some new Burke in a dressing gown. Mind you, wouldn't put it past them to hold out for Assassin's Creed 2 and 7/8, in which Ezio must defeat the evil Templar nursing home orderlies by shooting blades out of his Zimmer frame. No, sputter the fanboys, that's how it works. Every Zelda game is the beta for the next one, which implies that Nintendo have been knowingly releasing an unfinished product for decades and still haven't gotten it right, but we lap it up every time like starved inbred kittens. The thing is though, even by those standards, completely fucked up standards that they are, Skyward Sword still isn't very good. This version of Link lives in a big floating ivory tower in the sky where everyone gets about on trained birds, and Zelda is the standard anime childhood friend love interest, which is at least a personality of some kind, but traditionally in Zelda games Zelda is either already a princess and has no personality, or discovers she's a princess and immediately loses all personality, most egregiously in Wind Waker, when she's initially a sassy and effective pirate queen, but the moment she discovers her birthright, her adventuring clothes transform into the world's least practical dress, and she spends the rest of the game locked in a cupboard. This time the magic sword comes free with a standard issue support character who deserves special mention because besides a twitchy enraged badger that points out important quest items by breaking wind at them, I could not imagine a worse assistant. Her big thing is spurious rigor. She can't just say go in the room and stab the big lad in the obvious glowing weak spot. It's always there is a 70% chance that you must stab the big lad in the obvious glowing weak spot. She sounds like a fucking laundry detergent commercial. Her other big thing is stating the obvious. Someone tells you to go to the forest temple. Bing, Link, I have calculated that we must go to the forest temple. Giant tentacles burst up through the floor. Bing, Link, I have calculated that there's a big monster outside with a narc on. You suck a man's cock. Bing! Link, I have calculated that you are sucking a man's cock. There is a 70% chance that you should now cradle his balls. All the rest of the time is mainly spent proving your worth. First you prove your worth for the Master Sword, then you prove your worth for the 3 Sacred Flames, and then prove your worth a few more times for the Song of the Hero. If I were Link, I'd throw the sword down and yell, do you want this motherfucker dead or what? I feel like I'm trying to arrest the person burgling your house, and you keep telling me to fuck off until I put on some nicer shoes. BFE stands for Before First Encounter, not as I at first believed, Big Fucking Igun. For the uninitiated, Sam Stone is a 90s action hero graduate from the Duke Nukem correspondence course with some kind of unclear role in the military and who started showing up to work one day in a customized t-shirt and jeans, and no one wanted to complain in case he blew cigar smoke in their face or shagged their mums. I will say the final boss fight rounded things off nicely. I was getting more and more frustrated when I couldn't even get a good look at the guy without being stomped into minestrone, wondering what the hell I was supposed to do, until I ran into a building for shelter and found a jetpack. Crote, why did I ever doubt you? Although the subsequent puzzle required to defeat the boss seemed like something out of a 90s adventure game, and rather jarring when every other puzzle in the game was solved by imitating a popcorn machine in a centrifuge. Painkiller managed to take that same retro shooting style and successfully elevated it without sacrificing what made it fun, while this just doesn't have the sack to take the same kind of risk. Sit in a nice comfy armchair with a bucket of cookie dough, lazily plow through Serious Sam 3 in a weekend and then never think about it again, because that's pretty much what the developers did. So another year has disappeared wailing into the yawning gullet of the Sarlacc of time, and only one issue remains. Who the hell drank my last 2 Mercury ciders? I know I left them in your fridge. I was going to drink them the next time I came around, you you fuck. Now, moral choice systems are, as mechanics go, right up there with the button that makes your character stick his thumb up his ass, but Infamous 2 demonstrated the best way to handle a moral choice system that you're stuck with. Pack that shit in. Of course, if they do go on to make an Infamous 3, I'm going to retroactively take this award away and give it to Minecraft or something. Number 3 is the token independent entry that must be included to maintain my pretentious game journalist cred. Bastion, which I persistently referred to incorrectly as The Bastion in my review. Guess no one will be dancing with me at this year's pretentious game journalist ball. Well, I warned that this game was probably going to end up here, and it most certainly has. Driver San Francisco. Surprisingly good doesn't do it justice. It would have been surprisingly good if I'd gotten through it without slumping forward and nodding off with the analog sticks jammed up my nostrils, but its innovative car-hopping mechanic ensured a constant gameplay flow as smooth as a syrup enema, and the good writing is the rectal cork that seals the deal. No retrospective of 2011's shittier moments would be complete without a mention of the legend-making disappointment that was Duke Nukem Forever. 13 years these guys were building an 80-foot jizz cannon in their backyard, and they invited everyone around for its first discharge, only for it to tip forward and dribble yellowy spunk over everyone's shoes. A symbol of 90s shooters reduced to 2 weapon slots and turret sections, more breathtakingly misogynistic than the Boston Strangler. So here comes the final devastating spurt directly into the new year's open mouth, my game of 2011. Now, some might say my choice is a predictable one, but I failed to give its predecessor any kind of official Game of the Year award, even though it badly deserved one, so consider this an act of penance on my part. That's right, it's Valve's second orifice penetration simulator, Portal 2. Interestingly enough, the crown of greasy brambles and throne of compacted garbage to be awarded to the worst game of 2011 are in this case 2 crowns, and perhaps some kind of chase long affair, because I can't decide which creepy masturbatory lead you by the nose flimsily justified violence upon vastly inferior enemies open quotes realistic shooter with a 3 on the end I despise the most. Battlefield 3 or Modern Warfare 3. I don't hate them because they're poorly made or fail in what they set out to do. I hate them for what they represent. Modern Warfare and Twattlefield not only show that people should stop making realistic shooters, but also make a convincing case that people should stop existing generally, and perhaps we should save time, form a big circle, and on an agreed signal, all cap the person to the right. Oh, Happy New Year, by the way. Since you're all no doubt very busy procrastinating on the internet, I won't waste your valuable time recounting the plot of the game. Suffice to say that Bowser has started issuing his ransom demands in the form of unlockable 3D pictures. Sadly missing the glaringly obvious opportunity for Princess Peach cheesecake shots. I mean, might as well, Nintendo, while you're still trying to convince us the 3DS wasn't a bad idea. But no, I guess they're following the usual Nintendo post-cock-up policy, which is to keep desperately hammering away at it until either reality somehow spontaneously alters to fit with their deluded vision of it, or they come up with another stupid new idea they can beat into the ground with a Mario-branded shillelagh. You know what? I'm already bored of talking about Mario. Let's talk about something else, like Rayman Origins. It plays most similarly to New Super Mario Bros. Wii, right down to the 4 players, 2 of which are named characters and 2 of which are passing woodland creatures that walked in the wrong door by mistake. Crucially, though, players do not bounce off each other like they did in some Wii, so you can actually get through a level without disowning 3 friends or family members. Another difference is that Rayman ditches the live system, a very stupid and outdated concept that Nintendo have to stick to because of an ancient voodoo curse that will make their bell ends explode if they try to think for 5 minutes. After huge piles of games come out in the lead up to Christmas, all fighting to be the game little Timmy finds under the tree that will one day inspire his high school massacre, January seems to be fast turning into catch-ups month for me, when Sonic Generations is intended as a celebration of the Sonic games up to this point, in which modern-day Sonic finds himself caught up in some temporal shenanigans and in the company of his younger self, still bright-eyed, innocent, and untainted by the Sega 32X. At first I was thinking, okay, you're going to remind me of the less retarded days of the franchise with some remakes of some old classic levels strung together with a half-baked plot you scraped off Scott Bakula's bath mat. That's cool. I'm down. Can't wait to play an update of Mystic Cave Zone, because that music was the shit. But it turned out Generations only updates 1 classic level per game. Green Hill Zone from Sonic 1, Chemical Plant Zone from Sonic 2, etc. And this led inexorably to a brain-scouring moment when I was faced with a level based on part of Sonic the Hedgehog 2006. I mean, there's no way of making a game like this without coming across as self-congratulatory, but it wouldn't matter so much if you're congratulating yourself for something good. And yet here it is, presented unironically in this alleged celebration of Sonic's greatest moments. If I were a diplomat, I'd call it misplaced conceit, but I'm not, so I'll call it frothing bug-eyed self-delusion. Speaking of the Woodland community, remember all those friends of Sonic he accumulated over the years that all disappeared from more recent Sonic games because everyone hates them? Well, guess who's back en masse? But lest you accuse the game of putting them in for fan service, although I'd hate to think what kind of fan was baying for a return appearance of fucking Charmy the Bee. After a couple of cinematics depicting dull, ridiculously over-choreographed lightsaber fighting, since Star Wars is still forced to carry the attitudes of the prequel movies around with it like a child dragging its stillborn Siamese twin, this, it turned out, is a primarily long-ranged class whose job is to hide behind things going pew-pew-pew with a blaster, and in curious defiance of how blasters usually behave in Star Wars, not missing 90% of the time. I've developed quite a few guidelines for my work over the years, like never use a yo-yo simile when you can use a miscarried fetus dangling forlornly from its umbilical cord, and as a rule, I don't usually review Xbox Live Arcade games on their own. They tend to be shorter, so I usually review them in pairs and try to find some connecting theme between them, like putting Bastion with From Dust because they both centralize the theme of rebuilding the world, or Deathspank with Limbo because in Deathspank you have a sword and Limbo makes you want to start cutting yourself. But I'm afraid I couldn't find any XBLA games that could be meaningfully linked to Amy, because there aren't any games about making your way down a corridor dragging a large steel safe chained to a metal ring around your throat, or any games about smashing your head into a septic tank until blood and shit
spit runs down your face into your screaming mouth and down your throat until you choke and puke and it all comes out your nostrils. Using the word escort to describe core gameplay is like using the words bloody and viscous to describe a urine sample, but Amy pulls her weight by having the power to heal you, create cones of silence, and telekinetically blast things aside. Obviously, I'd have been rather put out if she didn't. In horror circles, small mute autistic girls are second in power only to Jason Voorhees listening to people fucking. You know, I think the biggest mistake game designers make is trying to make an NPC escort useful to gameplay rather than just a big crate on legs. Say what you like about Ashley from Resident Evil 4, at least she knew her fucking place. It was in a bin. But it's not just terrible design decisions, boys and girls, it's technically completely fucking inept too. I think Amy's developer only has a QA department, so they'll have more people to invite to their birthday parties. At one point, in my hubris, I ventured too close to a toilet cubicle and got stuck in the door. Now that would have been a cruel twist of fate if I'd been busting for a piss, wouldn't it? The subtitles are all fucked up, and there's a door in Chapter 4 that appears to have the text for an entirely different object attached to it. At one point I was attacked while interacting with a corpse, and the camera remained fixed on the corpse even after gameplay returned, so I just had to watch myself running back and forth past my field of view with zombies in hot pursuit like we were on the Benny Hill show. The final straw was when I spent far too long exhaustively creating a path for Amy to follow, only to come back to find that she'd gotten bored and wandered off directly into a zombie's mouth. Oh, I'm sorry the monster-infested post-apocalyptic Death City wasn't providing quite enough stimulation for you, sweetheart. I know where there's never a dull moment. My fucking S-bend. And someone you thought was good will turn out to be bad. Unusually though, that last aspect is stretched out into this 24-esque intrigue plot where we keep cutting away from the main story on the ship to play as other characters and other locations and flashbacks. And as is fairly typical of Resident Evil, the plot manages to be both ridiculously convoluted and childishly predictable because the bloke who turns out to be behind it all can be isolated to the guy who delivers every line like he's criticizing the blowjobs of a nun whose orphanage he's already decided to foreclose on regardless. Still, at least the series has gotten past the fucking Umbrella Corporation. I think fucking Umbrella Corporation is how they were officially listed on the Dow Jones. Like the monster design, humans crossed with deep sea wildlife, which is smart because with a lot of those things you don't even need to add glowy eyes to scare the piss right up someone's throat and out their nose. And wonderfully, this game has the first case I found of the stupid 3D gimmick actually interfering with gameplay. When you're aiming with the sniper rifle with the 3D on, you can't focus your crosshairs on the target. Ha! Eat it, James Cameron. Guess you'll have to start working on hologram vision after all. Sometimes my character would nimbly sidestep a blow, and sometimes their ass would get played like the bongos. I checked the manual, which said to use the analog stick as you're about to be hit. Use it, eh? Thanks. Have you guys considered writing bomb defusal manuals? Step 1, use your hands. Step 2, also maybe some pliers. Ah, doesn't this take you back? Around mid-2007, I was living in a drain pipe licking the backs of cornetto lids for sustenance, and one night I'd scraped together enough pennies to afford to spend the night at the YMCA. After agreeing to be viciously buggered in return for being allowed to go on the communal PS3, I played a demo for a game called The Darkness with a silly opening sequence and a slightly obtuse puzzle that I couldn't get past. So after Big Steve chased me off so he could play the new Ratchet and Clank, I scrounged up some yellow craft paper, made some figurines from stolen Burger King napkins, and produced a short internet video explaining how I'm really clever and therefore the game must be dumb. Who would have thought that that event would lead me to where I am today? Now I have cornetto lids beyond the dreams of avarice, and I'm the one paying to viciously bugger Big Steve. And I'm now professional enough to play a game for more than 10 minutes before I attempt to sabotage its developers' retirement plans, unless it's Final Fantasy, or Monster Hunter, or I'm bored, or in a bad mood, or it's Thursday. Darkness 2 is again a first-person shooter, but eschews Darkness 1's gritty realistic look in favour of that colourful, semi-cel-shaded comic book style as previously seen in such games as Borderlands and XCOM. It could be that it's just too short, presumably to make room for a singularly out-of-place co-op campaign in which you play a hilarious international stereotype so stupidly overpowered the gameplay turns into who can reach the baddies first. It happens in parallel to the main plot, but the main plot is about an angsty murderer being slowly reduced to half a pound of mince by a psychotic torture cult, while an evil dark power conspires to keep him in a state of constant emotional torment, so excuse me if I feel the fat drunken Scotsman with an axe is undermining the established tone a wee bit. I know I can't speak for everyone, at least not until The Device is completed, but surely it's not just me who's getting fed up with fantasy. And another thing, why does every fantasy game practically demand we learn a second language? I start up Kingdoms of Amalur and it's like skipping ahead 3 tapes on the Teach Yourself Norwegian course. The two Arthur are engaged in a conflict with the Sealy Fae and the Jutton in the lands of Knick-Knack Knocky and Bingly Bongly Boo. Due to the developer's name, the world map is indeed pretty big huge, but after 9 or 10 hours of aggressively samey questing, I still had an area the size of Bermondsey to plough. You certainly get your money's worth, but then it'd probably be pretty inexpensive to fill your mouth in with industrial grade concrete too. But there are a great many different flavours of bad on the spectrum of mashed raccoon guts to excite the connoisseur. There's your barely functional bad like Superman 64, which plays like someone made a big pile of models, textures and programming routines and threw them all one by one at a whirring cement mixer. There's your technically functional but nonetheless agonising bad like Kane and Lynch 2, an experience like duct taping the outlet pipe of a drawing pin making machine over your mouth. Never Dead, on the other hand, fits into the category of having enough good ideas to be a pretty excellent game had they been had by an actual game developer rather than the short bus full of donkey-headed circus children attended up with. The best constructive criticism I could offer would be to travel back in time to the first gameplay planning meeting with a large Hessian bag and some day labourers with cricket bats. Hey, said one developer looking up from his Lego set, if our character's immortal then there's not going to be much challenge, is there? Why don't we put in another character he has to escort? And that's as far as he gets before disappearing into the Hessian bag and his pig-like squeal to drown drowned out by the grunts and thwacks of the day labourers at work. And, says another developer sticking whiteboard markers up his nose, let's constantly put some monsters around that can instantly game over you if they suck in your disembodied head, but you can avoid it by completing a quick time event. Get in the fucking sack. You know what I hate? Interjects a third developer emerging from underneath his pillow fort. Using nice convenient button presses for sword attacks when we could be rattling the right analog stick back and forth and up and down like a clumsy teenage boy's first time at third base. Thank you for sharing, I would say. You know what I hate? You not being in this fucking sack right now. The gameplay is reminiscent of Left 4 Dead, since if the four of you don't learn to work together, then you'll end up like the Beatles, either shot dead or narrating Thomas the Tank Engine.
Still, it's always nice to see a big property actually getting all wrapped up before it face plants into too many yeast infections. It'd be difficult to think of a way any hypothetical cash-in future spin-off could possibly raise the stakes higher than this. I mean, what do you do after you've threatened to destroy every living thing in the galaxy, threatened to destroy every living thing and also their cat? Mass Effect concludes not so much with a bang or a whimper, more the sound you get from releasing a balloon and watching it fart its way around the lounge. I know a lot of people have been down on the ending, but I thought it could have been worse. That quote's not going to end up in any EA marketing material, but for what it's worth, I'm not left disappointed. But then I am completely jaded. I'm having a good morning if I don't accidentally piss on the loofah in the shower. But I had to thumb through the manual to figure out how to go into reverse. Double tap the brake button? Why can't we just keep holding the brake like every driving game that wasn't designed by the rear half of a horse? What the fuck am I going to need the brake for after the car has stopped? Percussion? It was while hunting through the option menus for a control scheme that didn't inhale dead spiderlings through a whale's urethra that I discovered that this default setup is named Classic Twisted Metal Controls. Oh, well, that's all right then. As long as you're preserving horrible ideas in the name of tradition, what's good enough for the Catholic Church is good enough for you. I think it's fair to say that popular culture has bitten off more zombies than it can comfortably chew. People just can't seem to get enough of the grumbly little bastards. Oh man, they seem to say. I love zombies. I love how they walk like there's a single drop of piss working its way down their leg, and how they look like us but not quite, so I can slaughter them in their thousands without shame or consequence. And I love how they satirize the dumb sheep-like consumerism of modern humanity. I love it so much I'm going to blindly buy everything with zombies in it with no perception of irony whatsoever. So I was going into this with a sense of, fuck yes, it's Akiyama again. I love his horrible mauve blazer, and now he's dual-wielding custom pistols like a boss. I just want to take him home and mount him to my kitchen wall so my kids will have an appropriate role model to look at over their Honey Nut Cheerios every morning. Secondary protagonist and recurring series mad person, Goro Majima, really comes into his own as a character. It's so rare to see an action game protagonist who seems like he's enjoying himself, not in a dry, cool, unflappable badass sort of way, but giggling like a schoolgirl who's just found the headmistress's secret collection of erotic birthday cakes. So yes, Ryu Hayabusa has a grotesque swollen arm covered in hideous exposed veins, so imagine how bad it looks after he gets cursed. For example, when your power bar gets full, you can make a big fire dragon appear and chomp everyone. The game establishes that you regenerate more health back if your power bar is still full after fights, and I assume this was meant to encourage you to not be a massive cheapskate asshole who has to call his dragon friend to beat up the school bullies. But then I noticed that doing the dragon thing also makes all your health come back. I guess he tosses you a couple of Nutri-Grains while he's sorting out the baddies for you. So an attack that was once merely cheap is now actively paying you money to use it. And this isn't even mentioning the other cop-out fuck you attack where Ryu just automatically kills 5 lads if you're bored of the whole game thing and want to take a break and eat some chips while violence happens in baffling extreme close-up. I don't think I can call myself a Silent Hill fan anymore. It's hard to stay enthusiastic about one's favourite rock band after the lead singer melts into an oleaginous slurry on stage and drips all over your sneakers. I can be cruel sometimes, but hold on to your panties, Grandma. I'm going to say Downpour is probably my favourite Western-developed Silent Hill thus far, which is still like saying of these reproductions of Picasso paintings created by flicking droplets of sparrow puke at a canvas 10 feet away, I think this one is the least whiffy. Do you know how long it's been since I've had to draw my own map for a game? I'm genuinely asking because I don't know, although I'm pretty sure Princess Diana still had all her organs at the time. So it's got the right survival horror combat and the right survival horror exploration. All Silent Hill Downpour needs now to earn a great big fat tick at the bottom of the page is to be scary. Oh. This always ends up being the sticking point, doesn't it? Did you know that I'm automatically biased against Nintendo? I didn't, but I'm sure you'll be able to scroll down to the comments right now and find unassailable arguments to that effect. My grudge basically started back in the 2000s when they brought out the GameCube. Oh, said I suppose you expect me to be impressed, do you, by your genuinely enjoyable games and one of the best designed controllers of the generation? How dare you put on such airs? Out the window with your ghastly little box ottoman. What's this? The DS? With a well-implemented touchscreen driving thoughtful game design? Where the fuck do you get off? Window! Okay then, now that's covered, here's Kid Icarus Uprising, a shit game for twats. The main character is named Pit, not Icarus, perhaps actually naming the character after a mythological figure famously destroyed by their own hubris and overconfidence smacked a little of tempting fate, but anyway, he's an angel living a sort of cutesy-ass mythology world populated by anime versions of Greek deities before Kratos got his leathery mitts on any of them. In broad terms, Pit's goal is to thwart the plans of the Queen of the Underworld, Medusa. I always thought Persephone was Queen of the Underworld, but I suppose one can't ask for too much adherence to classic mythology in a game where you shoot giant Groucho Marx glasses that blow bombs out of their nostrils nostrils. As you may have inferred from my pain-racked sobs throughout last week's video, I was at the time suffering from rather severe tonsillitis, so everything that passed my lips magically transmuted into an entire Mongol infantry unit the moment I tried swallowing it. Basically what I'm saying is the back of my mouth looked like a bunch of incontinent seagulls had exploded in a cave. Basically what I'm saying is it looked like a shoggoth had gotten cold feet while trying to use my epiglottis as a diving board. Basically what I'm saying is you could have cut my tonsils out and hid them in a basket of fancy cheeses and no one would have been the wiser. Basically what I'm saying is more painkillers, yum yum. When you come across a puzzle room, I'd recommend against telling yourself you'll come back and figure it out later, because that will inevitably end with having to trek back through 7 different wildernesses to scrape together the last few cubes. Although in some cases puzzle is entirely the wrong word. One requires you to translate Morse code, another scan in a 2D barcode, neither of which are puzzles, strictly speaking. If I fixed the door on my tumble dryer with a screwdriver, I would not describe that as solving the riddle of the slightly rattly spin cycle. James must follow the same path of evolution Alex did to build up his powers while getting to the bottom of 2 nebulous agendas. That of Blackwatch, the ever morally dubious PMC, who could only be called cartoonishly evil if we're talking about one of those cartoons that goes out at 3 in the morning on a foreign language TV station, and that of Alex Mercer himself, although it turns out both agendas essentially boil down to let's infect a bunch of innocent civilians for a larf. Also, I'm fond of how Prototype 2 consolidates the character upgrades and side activities. Blimey, that was a dry way of putting it. Fuck aroundy, makey super murder. If you take the time to track down the collectible audio logs, you'll find that approximately 100% of the things record someone at Blackwatch talking about how much he loves throwing school children into jet turbines and rubbing the greasy remnants into his prostate. And you have to wonder where Blackwatch could possibly be finding this seemingly inexhaustible supply of emotionless psychopaths. Possibly Liverpool? Yeah, I was heartened to find a new release on Steam last week by the name of Risen 2 Dark Waters that billed itself as a pirate-themed RPG. And suddenly that wasn't the only thing that was rising. Dick joke, swing and a miss. Because I challenge you to come up with one thing in this toxic world that doesn't sound vastly improved by the addition of the prefix pirate-themed. Pirate-themed bar mitzvah, pirate-themed state execution, pirate-themed Ugandan child slavery. Most of all, I guess I was looking forward to not having to kill Russians for once, because I like Russians. Worked with a Russian girl while office temping once, and I imagine we'd have gotten along very well if I'd understood a bloody word she was saying. Or your task is to assassinate a bunch of German V2 rocket scientists before they can be enlisted by the dirty Russians. Oh, for fuck's sake! Can we at least leave off the fucking Cold War until we're finished with the hot one? I mean, historically, America and Russia are fucking allies at this point. This is going to make things awkward at the next White House Sunday coffee morning. Anyway, Sniper Elite Wee Poo. Classic. I'll be damned if it isn't gratifying as hell to get the job done sneaky style, especially when you get to watch a well-placed bullet zoom along in slow motion and tunnel through Fritz's brain pan, tearing up all his treasured memories of eating schnitzel as a boy. No guilt, he's a Nazi. You could pull his fucking toenails out with pliers and it'd still be about as morally complex as Duck Hunt. Not having played through the first 2 Diablos, I did do some preparatory research, by which I mean I read their Wikipedia articles, and what struck me about the plot synopses was that they seem to be recounting the actions of every character in the game except the player, which is very telling of your role in life being some kind of highly efficient tag-along whose main job is to kill whatever big motherfucker is left over when everyone else has been killed or turned evil, motivated apparently solely by the promise of a veritable cornucopia of old pants. I relied heavily on one ability to summon a pack of zombie dogs and another to make them all explode. Fair weather friend, that's me. By far my most devastating attack, because with 3 puppies strategically humping legs throughout the enemy crowd, this is pretty much groin-focused carpet bombing. But it made a lot of other skills real useless real fast. One of the alternatives to the summon zombie dog spell, for instance, was making enemies really scared and run around for a bit. Not tempted, unless in their terror they bite their own arse off and spontaneously combust. What I really don't get is the appeal of randomly generated dungeons. Surely that could only possibly pay off during a second playthrough when if the player realises that this small handful of barren rooms maniacally copy-pasted and then arbitrarily stapled together seems to have been arbitrarily stapled together slightly different to before. If a book randomly rearranged its chapters with every read, then every chapter would have the characters doing fuck all because the plot wouldn't make sense otherwise, so the end result will always be a fucking boring book. It's not just missing the forest for the trees, it's missing the forest for the trees in another completely different forest. Yes, the one thing everyone knows about Max Payne is that the main character has some kind of ventilation hole in his skull, meaning he can concentrate really, really well when he's hurtling through the air. It was the game that introduced the concept of bullet time to video games, which in the long run turned out to be like introducing seawater to New Orleans. I'm going to have to venture into spoiler territory now, so if you don't want to hear them, stick a drawstring bag over your head and pull on the cords until you see the face of God. The plot hole one could drive a glacier through is the twist that one of Max's employers is behind the dirty crimes, and Max was specifically hired to be the, quote, fall guy. Point 1. Fall guy for what? He spends the whole game disrupting the dirty crimes and killing hundreds of the main baddie's allies in the dirty crimes while openly being in the employ of the main baddie. How exactly did the main baddie pitch this clever scheme? Point 2. Was there not a single grizzled drunk within convenient walking distance that could not have also been a serviceable fall guy that they had to go all the way to New York to pick one up? Dragon's Dogma is a fantasy RPG by Capcom of all people, a company whose attempts at story writing are routinely plagued by the closest thing to a competent storyteller in the company being one bloke's daughter's Mad Lib collection. It's just that I feel weird being asked to assess their performance when class aside, they're pretty much all the same behavior-wise, a cadre of absolute dunces that point out baddies, pick up shiny objects, and constantly repeat the bleeding obvious. This area is quite verdant. We are on a path. We could get a good view from the top of that tower. I know we could, asshole. Do you know how I know? Because I was just on the top of that tower, and so were you. What would be the best word to describe this year's E3? Routine, perhaps. Certainly seemed to follow the usual central commandment, thou shalt come out of it knowing about as much about the actual gameplay of the big-name titles as thou would if thou had stuck thy head down a toilet. Of course, for the last couple of years, there's been a secondary law. Every new thing thou learnest about the Wii U will somehow make it seem even worse. So while we're on the subject, let's start with New Mario Super Brothers Wii U something. If they bolt any more extraneous words onto this title, it's going to look like fridge magnet poetry. New Super Mario... I'm just going to call it Steve from now on, alright? Still, at least there's actual gameplay on display, unlike in the Assassin's Creed 3 trailer, and incidentally, with that, there's a rather disturbing theme emerging of British people being brutalised. But surely this pattern won't be continued by the Tomb Raider trailer? Oh good, it wasn't, because if the voice actress playing young Lara Croft in this trailer genuinely thinks that resembles an English accent, then I will deep fry my bathroom sink and eat it with Worcestershire sauce. Right, what's next? Oh, what a delightful trailer for some kind of Lost Planet sequel. What are they calling this one? Dead Space 3? Fuck off! If there's no or very little gameplay in a trailer, ask yourself what don't they want to show you. The same bland garbage as always, no doubt. I mean, look at Watch Dogs. That's how you do it. 10 minutes of unedited gameplay showing core mechanics that made my balls heat up and toss restlessly in their sack like kittens to be drowned. Congratulations, Watch Dogs, for winning the inaugural Zero Punctuation Least Excruciating of E3 award. If you're gonna get pumped for that. Not because you saw an eighth of a second of Master Chief wearing a new hat. But with his two most recent games, Suda has had to share his toys with the other kids somewhat. With Damned it was Shinji Mikami, and in this case it's open quotes acclaimed filmmaker James Gunn. So acclaimed I had to look him up, but apparently he wrote the screenplay for the live-action Scooby-Doo movie, so that clears that up, and alright, yes, he made Super as well before you all pounce for the comment section. You played Juliet Starling, a blonde high school cheerleader alongside whom even the cold vacuum of space seems complex and busy, who also happens to belong to a family of monster hunters, so when a dark ritual summons the undead legions to her school, she has to pull out a massive rainbow-patterned chainsaw and sort shit out one neck stump at a time, assisted by the decapitated head of her boyfriend Nick, who serves as a convenient portable straight man and part-time ballistic missile. This is the part where we display our palms and wobble them back and forth, shrieking, "Quirky!" Lollipop Chainsaw just loves breaking things up with set-piece mini-games, in which I tended to die several times because they were throwing a whole new set of rules at me like a fridge on a railroad track, and then I'd get a low rank for the whole level because I continued more than once, and then I'd start hearing the voices again. Which was your least favourite? Mine was Zombie Baseball, because you have to defend a bloke running the bases as slowly as possible who can take hits about as well as a stained glass tennis racket. So let me tell you about Steel Battalion Heavy Armor. I picked it up because the back of the box said, "The Kinect had finally found its hardcore game," and I interpreted that as a challenge. But I've always thought Kinect combined with the controller could work in the same way a man with no arms or legs could still join in everyday life if you strapped them to a luggage trolley. The tutorial went by alright, move the vehicle with the controller and use the Kinect to operate the cockpit levers, but the moment I got into an actual mission, fucking Christ, it was like jumping to Expert Freebird on your first morning at Guitar Hero lessons. "This game is unfucking playable," I said aloud. "Shame on you," came a reply. "Playing games is your job, regardless of their quality. If you have any self-respect, you'll stick with it." So anyway, Quantum Conundrum is a game available on Steam that comes to us from Kim Swift. Quantum Conundrum is a game that wouldn't have gotten very far into its elevator pitch. 4 words in, first-person precision platforming, and the CEO will be hammering on that call button like it'll somehow make his heart start working again. I was hunting around the Steam forums for a solution, and I found a post stating that anyone who doesn't know how to edit Unreal Engine INI files, or doesn't have access to a top-range PC powered by the ghosts of dead Microsoft-certified system engineers, has no business playing PC games. This review is dedicated to you, anonymous forums poster, because you're a cunt. What are you? You're a cunt, yes you are. You live in a cunty cottage and you drive a cunty car. Could a video game reasonably make us feel guilty for things it told us to do? Can a video game use shooty gameplay to induce emotions other than visceral joy? Or will the intended message inevitably be overlooked by an audience who will probably just be trying to have fun shooting things? Sorry, is this getting too contemplative early on? Here are some farting noises. You know when a shithead wins the lottery and immediately buys a frozen champagne sculpture of his own scrotum and a pack of Filipino slave boys to hold up his home shelving units? Well, if that person was a city, it would be Dubai. I don't want to spoil much because my magic crystal ball tells me I'm going to recommend this game, but a turning point comes when Walker and the player unwittingly do a bad thing. I felt like shit afterwards, like I'd played the Modern Warfare 2 airport scene with every civilian replaced with Bambi's mum. Perhaps this is an inevitable part of gaming growing up as our childish fantasies are torn from us and we are forced to confront consequences in an unfair, uncaring, and unavoidable world of hatred, misery, and death. You know, before I made a living doing this job, with job in quotation marks the size and shape of a giant pair of drooping labial flaps, I designed a few point-and-click adventure games, and if you're thinking of having a go at making your own, here's my hot tip. First, think of a problem that the player has to get around, like, say, helping a cat down from a tree. Then think of how a normal, sensible person would solve the issue with the objects that would be close to hand. Then seal your head inside a half-full vat of boiling chlorine for about 20 minutes, then write down another way you'd solve the problem that at that moment makes perfect sense to your probably fatally poisoned mind. Repeat this process until you've discovered the most circuitous possible solution, maybe hiding a spider under the sunshades in Old Man Witherstein's car so that he crashes it into the tree trunk, dislodging the cat and allowing you to catch it in a bucket of rose petals you found on the moon. Dum-de-dum, lovely walk through the forest. Ah, man with leg trap, zombies coming, save him! Unfortunately for him, I was carrying a massive fuck-off axe at the time, and what with everyone shouting at me, I made a snap decision, a choice of words that the poor bastard's leg might have found appropriate. It took 4 or 5 chops, and by the end of it I was almost in the fetal position in my chair, and my legs were crossed like an Amish virgin watching an MMA First Blood crotch kicks only match. And I'm not sure why they called it inversion when you only get to walk on the ceiling like once. A more appropriate title might have suited, like Another Meaningless Distraction on the Inexorable Path to the Grave. Although there is one bit in the opening narration where Russell Davis Russell drops the title word while waffling on about how much things have changed lately. Oh, okay, glad we cleared that up. So what the title's supposed to be saying is that this is the story all about how my life got flipped turned upside down. Statistics show that only 20% of the people who start playing a game will finish it, so I can pretty much say whatever I like about the end of a video game, and 80% of you buggers have no choice but to believe me. The Amazing Spider-Man was a recent movie which was totally fantastic, above average, watchable, poor, about as much fun as sifting through a vat of funnel web spiders for your pet Black Widow, delete where appropriate, and I ended up playing the video game tie-in, and I will say straight away that I thought it was very odd for the game to end with Gwen Stacy fisting Peter Parker with a handful of baby grasshoppers. The opposite button to the one that lets you point to the place and go to the place is the go to any place besides this one, where things are fast shitting the bed button, which you slam like a pornography enthusiast mashing Alt-Tab as the boss walks in to make Spider-Man immediately lose his pursuers and hide up on a random wall. It's okay, reassures the game, we leave no crap out behind in these parts, you just swing down and have another go once Spider-Man has finished regenerating his health while making really unnatural gasping noises like an anime character trying to make a decision. Interestingly, the actual missions are largely stealth-focused, which makes sense because when I look at a guy dressed like a patriotic circus acrobat who constantly reads from his stand-up set that his aunt assured him was hilarious, I think here's a guy who wants to go unnoticed, or perhaps more appropriately, here's a game that wants to be Arkham City. On the surface, you are Gordon Freeman, a bearded mute who somehow managed to gesture his way through MIT and must escape from an underground research complex after aliens from another dimension invade and nickel the good parking spots. And if you want, you can leave it at that, cleaning mashed headcrab guts off your armoured suit nipples, but if you pay attention to the background details, you can find yourself in a far bigger story, involving conspiracy and interdimensional conflict and a mysterious man in a blue suit with the ability to manipulate time and space. Presumably he worked for the accounts department. It was simultaneously action up the butt and a well-crafted story about being a part of something far beyond your understanding. That's why it always struck me as kind of weird that by the time of Half-Life 2, the human population regards Gordon Freeman as the new Jesus, because all I remember him doing was get chased around failing to rescue his co-workers, and depending on my mood, occasionally also shooting them in the knees to see if they do that little shaky leg animation that I think is cute. And then he spends the intervening years locked in the accounts department's fridge, so all I can say is he either had a fucking good PR team working on his behalf, or his beard releases a pheromone. And there's something kind of janky about the physics in this that takes me out of it. I can't get hard if the rubble keeps fading away when it hits the ground. It makes me think I'm smashing up ghost castles. And there's no satisfaction in evicting ghosts, they just go walk through someone's wall and live there instead. Deadlight just frustrates me, and it's almost insulting the way the story hasn't a single original concept and thinks it's a lot cleverer than it actually is. Okay, I guess I'd better give an ending spoiler warning at this point, so attach distressed bats to both your ears if you don't want to hear it, but honestly, you don't have to be Jonathan Creek to have this shit figured out from near enough the outset. If I mention that no other character ever admits to having seen Randy Gandy's family since the outbreak, that he occasionally hallucinates them as if, say, his subconscious mind is trying to tell him something that he doesn't want to confront, and that he keeps finding collectible ID cards that all bear the names of famous murderers just to give you absolutely no credit whatsoever, then you can probably connect the dots yourself. Yes, we're dancing that old chestnut, the Memento Mambo, the Silent Hills Samba. You'd think you'd remember doing something like that, wouldn't you? I mean, it's not like forgetting to leave the milk bottles out. But as I said, the book of demonstrably written tales is nothing if not self-aware, wearing its comedy game armor set for the full +15 defense bonus against criticism. But fortunately for me, does nothing to defend against criticism of its comedy, which leans far closer to the miss than the hit. A joke ideally delivered is being slapped in the face with a fish by a man who runs in and out of the room giggling, and the comedy in this is more frequently akin to a fish gathering flies in the middle of a kitchen floor, while the same man stands nearby morosely pointing at it with an outstretched arm, and the fish is wearing a Viking helmet because fantasy games, am I right? Fittingly, Sleeping Dogs was originally of the slightly laughably named True Crime series, the original Grand Theft Auto clone, except there was a developer switch and they had to come up with a new title that somehow makes even less sense, although there's a racist joke about East Asian cuisine in there somewhere that you'll be pleased to hear I'm not going to acknowledge. The recreated real-world city is Hong Kong, and the petty crim footstool that dreams of the stars is Wei Shen, a Chinese-American recently returned from the States to sign up with the Triads, because who the fuck else are you going to sign up with in Hong Kong? The real IRA. The Triad's surefire test for whether you're an undercover cop or not is that undercover cops won't kill, but I'm not sure where they got that impression, because Shen hesitates more about putting up flypaper than killing his fellow man, and as long as you stick to other criminals, you can go wild as far as the police are concerned. They're only iffy about you killing pedestrians, and even then it won't give you negative police experience, you just get less of it at the end of the mission. Now, Timmy, we can only get you an Xbox and 5 games for Christmas this year because you did blowtorch your initials into your sister. So if you are the rabidest of the rabid GTA fans, then here's a GTA clone still dripping with birthing chamber fluid to tide you over. But for me, the question is whether Sleeping Dogs represents a step forward or a step back for the sandbox genre. And let me put it like this. 8 years ago, GTA San Andreas had a jetpack. Does Sleeping Dogs have a jetpack? Well then, better luck next time. Death isn't necessarily the embodied concept of death. He's just some asshole who's really good at killing things, although I don't see how that makes him any more entitled to be called Death than War was in the previous game. And while we're on the subject, the other two horsemen of the apocalypse were established in Darksiders II to be called Fury and Strife. I'm guessing THQ's Bible was written by Image Comics in the 90s. We've already got the War remit covered. Wouldn't Fury and Strife be a bit redundant? And besides, Strife? What are his duties in the apocalypse? Giving people anxiety disorders? But what I call the most bullshit on is the notion that Death is doing all of this out of affection for his brother War. Because Darksiders is cut from the cloth of such things as Warhammer 40k, where no emotion exists besides barely contained rage. And I cannot imagine Death showing affection for anything. I can't picture War and Death sharing bunk beds at Horseman Towers, talking about Boyzone and doing each other's hair. This is the kind of story that's crying out for an audience surrogate character, like maybe Death could be carrying around the soul of a dead Starbucks barista that he was supposed to be ferrying to the afterlife. And maybe they could ask the important questions on our behalf. Questions like, is there anyone around here who doesn't look like someone set fire to a thalidomide baby? I saw you smeared across the new release shelf like old cheese on a pizza box lid. New Super Mario Bros. 2? If the word new were a small child, I would be calling social services on Nintendo right about now, because that is nothing short of abuse. I'm not falling for it this time, Nintendo, so now even if you did massively shake up the formula and recast Mario as a brash intergalactic smuggler piloting the Yosh 1 through the Imperial-controlled Mushroom Nebula, I will never know, because you took too much for granted one too many times. I'm not buying this one. I don't care how slow releases get. I'll find something to review. I'll review a fucking zombie mod. A zombie mod for Arma 2 called DayZ specifically. The next step was to find a gun, something all my peers never seem to have any difficulty with, but after moving inland a bit and exploring a convenient city, I found a fucking treasure pile of ordnance at the top of a stairwell in a 3-story building, including a rifle, a pistol, and ammo to spare. Blimey, I thought this game was unforgiving, I thought. I wonder where all this came from. Maybe it belonged to this dead player over here. Hey, why are all the windows broken? And then I was shot by a sniper. Okay, lesson learned. Never gawp at your inventory screen while standing fully upright next to a window, like a big squeezed dick poking through a hole in a bathroom wall. Oh look everyone, Yahtzee's doing a review of Romamorpega again. Better put our safety goggles on, because there's a lot of flying debris in a train wreck. I look forward to when he complains about there being lots of grind in it, like a man sending his gazpacho soup back to be warmed up. Well, you realise I'm not opposed to Mamorpegas as a concept, unlike JRPGs or ethnic cleansing. How distant that Elder Dragon business seems when you start off helping farmers fend off extremely localised problems, usually bandits whose hideouts they didn't have the presence of mind to build their farms further away from. Often not even that, they just get you to feed the cows and mow the lawn. Yes, jobs that a farmer might realistically give a random wandering yahoo, but I thought we were forging a legendary tale of fantasy. The fact that I was a necromancer made it pretty funny though. I pictured the farmer's wife standing at the kitchen window watching me chase moles out of the vegetable garden by summoning shadow demons from the Stygian pits to curse their very souls, and then turning to her husband and saying, he does know we've got a spade he can use, right? Borderlands, more like Board-a-lands. But now it's time for the sequel, and Borderlands, more like Snorderlands 2. Anyway, player characters from the last game show up as NPCs just to confuse matters. Let's call them Team Whittlebiscuit. And when a big robot boss shows up some ways into Borderlands 2, they make a point of going, oh no, not that guy, he defeated all of Team Whittlebiscuit off screen, no really. And then I took him down inside 5 minutes. Now bearing in mind Team Whittlebiscuit basically defeated Shub Niggurath last time around, either we take from this that the new characters are all superpowered in the least apparent way possible, or maybe Team Whittlebiscuit have spent the last 2 years sitting around drinking pints of cream, with ring donuts hooked over the rims. The best way to review a game, I find, is to start with your broad overall gut opinion about it and then work backwards to explain those feelings, and in the case of Borderlands, my broad analysis is that it bores me to fucking tears. FIFA 13 is a game about... Actually, has anyone played Mark of the Ninja on XBLA? But anyway, on the subject of sex crimes, let's get back to professional football. FIFA 13 is a game. In that respect, it's eerily reminiscent of Anna, an indie first-person horror adventure on Steam. Before you can even get into the sawmill, you have to find 2 parts of a mirror, arrange them on a wall, stick a pine cone to the front, and then light it on fire, because this in some way unlocks the front door. That's not a logic puzzle, that's something Hunter S. Thompson might attempt after he lost his front door key at a mushroom-fueled wilderness retreat. I'm glad I don't live in this neighbourhood. You probably can't even run yourself a bath until you've arranged 12 Snickers bars under the S-bend and pissed in the sink. Sorry, I don't know what's wrong with me. I just can't stay on topic this week. I'm supposed to be talking about FIFA 13. I'll start again. Tokyo Jungle is a game on the PlayStation Networks. Hang on, I got confused again. How long have I got left? 8 seconds? Fuck! FIFA 13 is a game in which you and your burly friends help a small leather sphere realize its dream of being in a net, and I think we can all agree that that's basically a positive thing. Nighty-night. Resident Evil 6 returns to something of a series tradition by having multiple simultaneous story campaigns. Outspoken misogynist and former Boyzone member Leon S. Kennedy kicks us off with some nice traditional zombie killing. Chris Fuck Boulders Redfield fights mutant terrorists in a more tactical shootery sort of way. Some new cunt called Jake fends off the love child of Ivan Drago in a piece of industrial farming equipment, and there's a fourth one that only unlocks after you've done the other 3 at 6 PM on Saturday afternoon, just when you think you're comfortably within deadline for once. And the plot involves, wait for it, an inexplicably wealthy Saturday morning cartoon villain unleashing monsters upon both China and the United States, so at least they're not being racist again. If I were Chris Redfield, I'd fucking give up. Well, I'd say, guess the human race is just determined to wipe itself out. Let's gather up every other Resident Evil protagonist and found our own city on the moon. But you just know Leon will insist on bringing his dumb friend Keith, who forgets to file his tax return one year and tries to cover it up by causing a zombie apocalypse. Resident Evil 6 is not the bold, fresh continuation needed by a series that hasn't so much worn out its welcome as spent most of its visit shuffling about on its arse, leaving an elongated brown smear along the hallway carpet. In Dishonored, you play as Corvo something, silent protagonist by royal appointment, who works as the bodyguard for the Empress and her daughter, and one has to wonder how he got the job when the Empress is stabbed 5 minutes in, and what an inconvenience that silent protagonism turns out to be over the course of the intro, when Corvo could have been saying things like, "No, I didn't stab the Empress," instead of becoming a fugitive. Or later on, when his erstwhile allies are saying, "Hey Corvo, we're sending you straight out on another suicide mission, say nothing if you're cool with that." Spare a thought for the lonely life of the video game military commander, the ones beside Commander Shepard, that is, who missed all the important lessons about delegation because he was off sick with the alien clap. First of all, you can't even get the job if you don't sound like you do movie trailer voiceovers in your spare time, and then you get to spend your whole life trying to wrangle the activities of desperate lone renegades with poor anger management who think that if they boggle their eyes hard enough and purse their lips like their daughter's fiancé just left the bathroom without washing his hands, then their orders can be regarded with the same amount of respect due to someone putting their finger in their mouth and making popping sounds. And who the fuck do you think pays for all those helicopters that invariably crash in the intro sequence? Because they don't give that shit away at Chuck E. Cheese. It's not enough to pay it money. You have to wait several in-game days for it to be built and camp out in its front garden looking into its bathroom window with binoculars. Oh wait, that's something else. When it takes 20 days to build a satellite, you might have forgotten what you wanted it for, but you'll throw a party for it when it does arrive. You'll give it its own little bow tie. But if there's anything I'm iffy about, it's the randomness of the UFO assaults, which are the only way to get resources. So if you've blown them all on new armor sets and satellite accessories, then there's nothing you can do but sit flicking playing cards into a hat, hoping against hope that a flying saucer will invade. Preferably in one of the countries with a high panic rating that's threatening to withdraw its support because urban sectoids are rummaging through their bins, and you seem to be spending all your time flicking playing cards into a hat and dressing up your satellites. So this week I've been playing a bit of Medal of Honor Warfighter. Sometimes I do a thing where I incrementally alter a game's name each time I say it until it's something stupid, but I'm feeling pretty fucking undercut here. You know, Warfighter, because he just fights wars all over the place, and then he gets his tax return done by his friend Numbers Accountant. I don't know anyone who didn't immediately laugh at this fucking name, so why didn't anyone involved in its development put their hand up? Or is that a flogging offence in the EA slave pits? Shoot that bloke, said my colleague, but I hadn't spotted the bloke he was talking about, so he said too slow and did it himself. A turret guy I'd been carefully flanking for a few moments was shot by an NPC just as I was lining up the sights. 3 enemy buildings full of snipers were bombed to dust by missiles launched from what I think was the vengeful finger of God. Why the fuck am I even here? I thought as I zoned out on the battlefield again, all the gunfire and shouting blurring together and settling on me like a big head-mounted pancake. This game has made it perfectly clear it doesn't want me around. It wants the kind of person who doesn't think Warfighter is a stupid title. Incidentally, Warfighter. So I stopped. An hour and a half in, I stopped. I put down the controller and turned it off. There are only so many neurons I'm prepared to squander. Then I played the Doom 3 BFG Edition instead. It's not me in a huge army invading hell, half-heartedly shooting at silhouettes 50 yards away that may or may not be a demon until some cosmic overseeing entity decrees that I may proceed and shoot up the next location. Instead, I'm in a corridor, and there's a monster in the way, and I can proceed once there isn't a monster in the way. You know what really jumped out at me? No objective markers. So if there's a locked door, I have to organically search the nearby environment for the key with no direction to go on. And you know what that took away from the experience? Nothing! A shooter is fast-paced, circle-strafing, wits-about-you, rocket-jumping, last scrap of health, tootly fuck pies, organic excitement in a fancy hat. It is not riding a conveyor belt to the next chest-high wall and resting your head on it until you get lulled into a lovely little sleep by other people's gunfire. Perhaps this calls for greater clarity of language. Doom 3 and Painkiller and Resistance 3 will call shooters, and we'll come up with a new name for Modern Warfare-style games like Spunk Gargle Wee Wee. Well, at your home base, there's this ongoing thing where Connor enlists specific craftsmen to recreate his own personal theme park version of Little House on the Prairie. So, you use the money and recipes that it seems every activity in the game rewards you with to craft everyday goods and items, and the friendlier you are with the craftsmen, the more things you can craft. Alright, I have successfully crafted a sofa. What do I do with the sofa? You sell the sofa for money! Okay, now I'm a millionaire East Coast sofa baron. What do I do with the money? Well, the most expensive things in the game are upgrades for your ship, which make it easier to complete the naval missions. Well, that's something, I suppose. What benefit do the naval missions provide me? More trading routes for you to sell sofas on! Sorry, when is this going to get back to stabbing people? What is it with you and stabbing people? What is it with you and not stabbing people? I feel sorry for 343 Industries, the company Microsoft brought in to do Halo because the company's champagne fountain needed refilling and Bungie escaped from the basement. It's always awkward replacing someone everyone's gotten used to, isn't it? This must be what it's like for new popes. Oh, sorry, the old pope always preferred golden syrup in his porridge. No, it's alright, the old pope and me had this little understanding. I'd fuck altar boys and he'd hush it up. And even on normal difficulty, one has a rather mean-spirited tendency to be killed very, very suddenly and without warning, mainly because of the many brightly coloured glowing projectiles one must avoid. About half of them plink off your armour like a sparrow in a glittery dress, and the other half blast your buttock plates off like a night on Bad Mexican. If this is combat evolved, then it's an evolutionary dead end. It's a fucking gay African mammoth. What heartens me is that eventually everyone currently over 40 will die, and video games will be as legitimate as all other entertainment media. Sitting down to play through Spec Ops or Uncharted will be thought of as just like going to the theatre. Playing online shooters will be like going out and actually interacting with other human beings, and playing spunk-gargle wee-wee games like COD Blops 2 will be regarded the same as drunkenly lying sprawled over the couch, half watching Top Gear because that was the first thing that came on when your head smashed into the remote, and also someone is slowly emptying a jug of cold porridge onto your head. The story switches between Generico McCracker I in the past and Generico McCracker II in the future as they struggle against this one terrorist bloke who is hatching a plot to hack all of America's unmanned military drones. Oh, bless, is the mean old foreigner trying to take away your infinite supply of poor innocent remorseless kill droids? Boo-hoo, Dr. fucking Doom. This really is a game for absolute cretins. If you've played through Blops 2 and legitimately didn't immediately figure out who the guy with the bag on his head actually was, then I will send you money because I'm pretty sure I could write you off as charity work. But perhaps I shouldn't dwell on the politics. The occasionally sympathetic portrayal of the villain and that whole chapter where you're called upon to defend a repulsively decadent future city for rich people does show a degree of self-awareness on Blops 2's part. I honestly can't be asked to speculate what level of irony we may or may not be operating on, so let's just judge it by the gameplay. It's boring and stupid, give it a miss. Fuck, that could have saved a bit of time. Hitman is a series of games about the world's greatest assassin, which sounds like a lofty title, but it's probably quite easy to become the world's greatest assassin when you're trapped in a mysterious parallel universe where everyone on the planet was nursed on lead baby bottles and failed to recognize someone wearing different clothes except when they're in the middle of murdering someone. Fancy dress parties must be a fucking nightmare in this world. God damn it, none of my friends have shown up and my home has been invaded by various professionals in standard workwear, modified to be sexually enticing for some reason. Oh no, wait, that must be Frank over there, garroting that nurse. If you're unfamiliar with standard Hitman gameplay, they're basically adventure games for the impatient. Missions take place in open-ended environments and you can either engineer an accidental seeming death with obscure inventory puzzles, or you can just stove their head in with a brick, because you've got shit to do. At times, Absolution is even a bit aggressive in trying to turn things into a shootout, such as when it leaves a sniper rifle next to a prime vantage point as one would leave a bottle of Sailor Jerry in a recovering alcoholic's bathroom cabinet. I am a banana. I say that partly because I like taking all my clothes off and hiding in bowls of muesli, and partly because, like a banana, I feel I'm going soft as I get older. You are Jason Brody, an American tourist and member of a small group of preening, self-centered rich gobshites who, to the immense relief of the entire known universe, fall foul of a slavery ring on a tropical island, run by a psychopath named Vars, whose name one can remember with the simple mnemonic, watch out for Vars, he'll enslave your ass. The character arc brings to mind the one in Spec Ops The Line, as in both cases a hostile environment strips the comfortable hypocrisies of civilization from an everyman protagonist, until only a monster remains, except in Far Cry 3's case, he starts thinking that he actually quite likes being a monster, and while you can never go back to your old life now that you have an itch that can only be scratched by adding to your necklace of testicles, at least you don't have to queue up at the DMV now. Come to think of it, the story aspect is generally weaker in the second half, especially after Vars the Arse, the character who is the fucking face of the game, mind you, disappears and is replaced by someone less interesting, and now that I'm on the complaint train, stealthing it is fun, but intense firefighting gets annoying, because your health drops like a fat dog from a hot air balloon, and wrestling with the weapon selector and health syringes under pressure is like rearranging the HDMI cables at gunpoint. But this is nitpicking, as we established at the start, I am a banana, and Far Cry 3's fine. It's alright. There is one last disappointment in the story ending, though. I opted to stay on the island rather than go home, but without wishing to spoil, that ending is shit. Don't tell me the good ending entails a guy who machetes bears while high going back to civilization, because I'd give him a week before he's making bootleg wallets out of fat people's ears. So I got myself a Wii U, and as with many Nintendo products these days, the startup process feels like you're joining a cult, with the constant music that one might hear in the elevators at a methadone clinic, and the crowd of me's staring up at you as if to say, come and join us, the master will be home soon. And I had to mute the fucking TV during the update process, because that repeating widdly wee noise felt like it was implanting hypnotic suggestions with a drill. Here's a fun drinking game I devised for the Wii U. Take a shot every time the little controller screen is doing something that couldn't have just been put on the TV screen without sacrificing anything. It's the best drinking game because afterwards you can legally drive home. Each protagonist has a random appearance, name and job, and it can be quite demoralizing when you've spent several hours as Zack Danger, Private Eye, only to make one stupid mistake and then get stuck with Fat Bob, the fucking community support officer. You play a conga line of hapless plebs holed up in a tube station with a mysterious voice calling itself the Prepper, or more accurately accurately, prepare up me ducks, put kettle on, doubt pub. And the Wii U's gimmicks are a solution looking for a problem. Plus the controller's got the battery life of a Sega Game Gear crossbred with a mayfly. Full charge, 3.5 hours, then dead. And I know Nintendo games keep reminding you to take regular breaks, but that's like reading the legal document before you click agree. Nobody really expects you to do it. Maybe you think 3 hours is a good length for a serious gaming session, and maybe sniffing someone's hair in a packed lift counts as first base.